republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
At this time, we'd like to invite anyone that'd like to come up. It's a time for what's called unscheduled public appearances. If the item's not on the agenda that have a public hearing, we might need to come up at this time to share with the council your comments. If you could please state your name and keep your comments to under 3 minutes, we'd appreciate it. So at this time, we'll now open up for unscheduled public appearances.
My name is April Slade. Do you know my address as well? You know me now. I just wanted to start a comment with a recording from the last 7 nights after 10 p.m. at the park. Just so we're going to play. Taken from the resident's home
What time?
after 10 p.m., several different times after 10 p.m., and that's over 7 nights. And then I want to follow with a comment that we appreciate your response to our position paper. However, it did not address the current impacts we are experiencing. This park is like any other in Highland, and the effects on us are much more severe. It appears there has been not much understanding regarding our situation. Making the choice to live next to a park did not prepare us for the reality of this particular park. The meetings held over the past couple of years seem to have overlooked the significant impacts we are experiencing. Our primary concern is the impact on the west side of the park. Final adjustments were made to the location of the Hinge Park without consulting the residents or recognizing or addressing the effects on residents. This needs to be addressed to ensure our concerns are. This needs to be looked at to ensure that our concerns are adequately addressed. We are expected to comply simply because we moved next to a park, but we can demonstrate that we had no idea the park would be like this. It is unique in size and shape and we should not have been expected to endure such impacts. We accept your offer to meet and would like this to happen within the next 2 weeks. This meeting would not be to discuss safety concerns as you suggested, but rather to specifically address the significant impacts to our lives and our homes, such as having to call the police nightly, noise, stress, and other similar issues. We need clarity and detailed information on the specific impacts and measures you plan to take. We would like to suggest a mediated meeting with the entire council and the impacted residents with possible representation from the police department to allow all involved to feel heard and understood. Thank you.
I'm Lindsay Weber. I'm just turning in the noise reports. I don't know if hearing it is better or seeing the numbers or what, but we called the police 6 times, and we found out this week that the cameras are not connected to the police at all, and so we will probably be calling more since we were hoping you would be looking at the cameras and seeing the impact, but now that we know that they're not connected to the police and there's no record and no one's watching them, and we will be calling more. So can I
just to clarify on that, point that I spoke with Andy, and he is working to get those hooked up with the police.
They are monitored currently by Andy and Josh, receive emails and get on and can monitor those that way. But we're trying to find the best way to have the police. It's a bit more challenging because not the same officers on all of the time. We're trying to find ways to make that.
Are there any other comments?
Laura Roth, and I've got a few questions. See that there is a question of $108,000 that the city is due in paying for their water services, and that there's a question of rolling it into a bond. And I wanted to know if this, with rolling it into a bond, you're paying not only the 108, but you're paying the 108 plus the interest. For this should be a line item or utility for the city, and should be your city budget. And with that, it kind of has a couple of different effects on the city, because we get to pay the interest rate. But not only that, but then when next year rolls around and you're doing your city budget, are you going to budget the 108 plus the interest that we had to pay and echo that interest rate we paid in order to meet the city's utility costs?
Laura, I appreciate it. The question kind of deals with the budget. Is it dealing with the pressurized irrigation transfer? Okay, we have a motion on that, so if we can kind of at that time, maybe we'll kind of go through it at that time, if that's okay. Meaning, answer your question.
You have a future one, a future meeting?
There's a meeting. On the agenda tonight. Item number 3D talks about the transferring the pressurized irrigation transfer. So we're gonna have a public hearing, and we can have the council kind of address that at that time. Does that make sense? Instead of addressing it now, if you're okay, we'll address it on that item.
That's a good question for you.
Yeah, it is. Thank you for coming in and asking that question. Anyone else like to come up and address the council? Okay, seeing none, we'll now close the time for public comment. We'll move on to our agenda item number 2, our consent items. We have 2 consent items: approval of the meeting minutes from May 21st, 2024, and appointment of a deputy recorder being Heather White. Anyone need to pull any of those?
I move to adopt the consent agenda.
I'll second.
Ready for a vote?
I'll have to vote verbally. I have it set up here, but somehow
Let's wait 1 second. Kim
yeah,
still
it's
is
went
either
to a
logging in
YouTube
or
thing.
you need to do vote of verbal. Okay, Scott.
Yes.
Okay, if you'll reveal. That is 5-0. We'll now move on to item number 3A, which is a public hearing, which is the proposed financial year 2023-24 final budget adjustments. And that will be Dave.
Thank you, Mayor. So I have a lot of items on the agenda tonight related to budget and such things, so I will try not to take too long and try not to be too boring for everybody. Okay. So budget adjustments, as you know, the budget is kind of a living document. When the budget is adopted in June for the next year, it's our best estimate of what we will see as far as revenues and expenditures. But there are instances where there are things that come up that happen that we did not anticipate, or we budgeted conservatively in our budget, and then reality is different than our conservative estimates. So for that reason, the law allows us to adjust our budget throughout the year. The year-end adjustments is our last chance to adjust the budget to be in compliance with state budgetary law. And so that's what much of this is doing. I did put on the PowerPoint some highlights of what we changed. Just for some background, when we are audited each year by our third-party financial auditors, they will look at budgetary compliance and see, have we met all of the state codes? What that means is that from an expenditure standpoint, within each department, did we stay within budget for the year for that department? So with that said, a department can be over budget in one line item and under budget in another line item. And as long as they offset to where the department is under budget overall, there would be no finding for non-compliance. We also are not required to adjust the budgets for revenues if the budgets are going up, but we do so just for the council's sake to be aware of what our revenues are doing. And it also helps us in our next year's budget that we're currently is proposed and will be voted on tonight, helps us to determine what our beginning fund balance is if we know kind of what our current year projections are doing. So that's kind of why we're showing a little bit more than is required to be shown. But we think it's important and good for you to see what's happening. Okay, so with that said, here are some highlights. All the details for all these are in the packet, and I'm not going to go through every line item that's in the packet because it's quite long. But these are some of the revenues that we are proposing to adjust based on actuals, based on what we project will happen in the rest of this year, which is only a couple of weeks. But in relation to some revenues, though, we also receive July and August revenues get accrued into this year. So for things like sales tax and property tax, franchise taxes, we also have to take into account what we think July and August will see. So, but sales tax is looking positive compared to what we budgeted at. We're proposing an additional $130,000. The fee in lieu of property taxes, that one was coming in a little bit lower than we had anticipated during the budget process. So we're proposing to decrease that. Utility franchise tax, so this is the energy tax on gas and electricity. It's a franchise tax on telecom as well. That has been really strong this year and was very conservatively budgeted in the FY24 budget. So this would bring it up to a similar level of the actuals that we saw for fiscal year 23 and close to what we're proposing or what we're anticipating to see for 24. Court fines has seen an increase. I couldn't tell you all the reasons for that, but we're watching it in the future year budget. We're not proposing this high of an increase, just being conservative again and not knowing if this year was an outlier and we just saw more tickets than we have in the past, and that's not going to continue, but we're keeping an eye on it and watching that trend. Interest income is a big one. This is citywide, so not only the general fund, but all of the enterprise funds, the capital improvement funds, all of the money that we hold in accounts that bear interest. We're proposing an increase of $562,000 there. That's due to higher interest rates than have been seen in the past. Sale of fixed assets. So the city occasionally sells assets that are no longer being used, equipment or vehicles. We had anticipated to receive a little bit more than what we're actually going to or have received, so we're reducing that revenue. Credit card processing revenue, we do collect a 3% credit card processing fee for anyone that uses a credit card to pay for a permit, a fine, things like that. And that previously had not been added into the budget, so we're going to add it. Garbage collection fees, this is not related to the proposed increase to the rate that we discussed last time, but this is just due to the growth that we've seen in the city during fiscal year 24. So this is how much we project to receive due to that at the current rates. And then cemetery lot sales are looking good for the year and coming in higher than we had budgeted, so we're increasing that one.
Do you mind if I ask, do you know what assets we tried to sell that we didn't get the 60,000? Was it trucks? What was it?
Jeff, do you know what we disposed of this year?
There was some smaller equipment, some pumps, generators, a couple of trucks. None of the real large trucks were sold this year.
Didn't we do a snow plow, Jeff, as well? And I think it brought in less than we were hoping it was going to.
Yeah.
Was my recollection as well.
Right.
Okay, additional revenues that we looked at, building permits is a big one. So we saw actual results about double what we had budgeted. This is due largely, I think, to the development that's going on in Ridgeview. We anticipate that that will slow in the next year. So if you look at the fiscal year 25 budget, we've decreased. If you looked at what we're projected to receive this year and then what we budgeted for next year, there will be a decrease.
Can you tell us what the percentage of permits that were available, which is 500 and something?
689.
689. How many
Yeah.
of those are remaining?
If you give me a minute, we just found that data recently. I'll look that up while
I think
David
that,
keeps
that was
going.
presented the last council meeting when we were
Yeah.
looking at the park impact fees, I think, right?
That
I think
council
there were-
meeting where I wasn't here and you spent $8
Oh.
million?
I'm sorry, you're right, Ron.
I
We
think
spent
there
an
were-
awful lot of money that last council meeting.
I think there were 225 total permitted lots that had not yet gotten building permits, if I remember correctly. 225 was my recollection,
225 to 250.
and that would be citywide.
But
But that, the majority of that, the vast majority of that would be
But
there,
David,
I would
this
assume.
building permit increase, that has to go into a special fund that the auditor put together. So that goes into a restricted fund, correct?
Yes, it goes into our building and development fund that is restricted to be used only for building and development expenditures. Yep. Related to that, also building plan check fees, we also saw an increase. Getting into Parks Capital Fund transfers, we added these transfers based on the discussion from the work session for items that the council wanted to fund for the Parks Maintenance Building, as well as Mountain Ridge Park, or Mountain, what's the name of the park? That park, Mountain Ridge Park. Impact fees kind of tracks with building permits. The more permits we issue, the more impact fees we collect. There were some, I think road, we did not budget for any. And so we're just adding what we've received so far this year. Parks receives quite a bit more than road does. But grant revenue, the majority of this is a MAG grant that was used for road projects. Park donations for Mountain Ridge Park, $50,000. Sewer services, again, this doesn't have anything to do with a rate increase or change. This is just the increase we've seen from the growth within the city. Culinary water contributions. So these are contributions from other entities that came into Highland to help pay for a project, a culinary water project. And then the rest of the adjustments to revenues are small amounts or use of fund balance within the various funds, just in order to balance the budget.
So David, a question I have, and I understand, are we starting to see, are there areas that we're overcharging that we need to adjust the fees down because we're starting to have a surplus? Do you understand, have we looked at it and analyzing, hey, we're collecting too much here, we should be adjusting those fees?
Yeah, I mean, it's something we're always looking out for, especially later tonight, you'll hear about our fee schedule changes. So all the departments participate in that review and seeing where fees are coming in and what they're paying for. At this time and during the budget preparation, I don't see anything that's drastically out of balance where we need to see a huge reduction. Building permits is one where, just because of the nature of the growth we're seeing, we saw a lot more than we had anticipated seeing. But as you know, that's kind of a cyclical fund where there's going to be expenditures for the fund that come after the fact that we're going to need some of that fund balance for. So I haven't seen anything that I think that we need to decrease fees or taxes for. Only things where, like with sewer or garbage, where we need to make some adjustments up. Okay, moving on to expenditures. So I just highlighted some of the bigger ones here. When we created that new building and development fund, we had intended to pay for 75% of the wages for the building and planning departments out of that fund and 25% to continue out of the general fund. This was because the general fund continues to provide some services that aren't necessarily related to development and growth, such as code compliance, reviews for like basement permits or things like that that aren't necessarily related to new permits, new growth within the city. That wasn't budgeted that way for building employees, so this is just reallocating 25% of their wages to be paid out of the general fund. Yep, we added $35,000 for the traffic control toolbox. We talked last time about the $50,000 garbage hauling contract increase. Building fund credit card fees, I mentioned that we charge a fee. We also have to pay our fees to our merchants, our credit card merchant providers. And most of we've seen a large increase because typically, or in the past, we weren't collecting or we weren't allowing builders to use credit cards to pay for building permits, but now we do. So those that want to pay the additional fee, they can use a credit card and pay the fee, and then we pass that on to our credit card processing merchants.
Is it dollar for dollar, or whatever we
No,
have
I
to
think we
pay?
collect a little bit more than what we're paying.
Than what we're paying, okay.
Yeah, just as like an administrative
Yeah,
type fee.
and that's fair,
Yeah.
good.
Third-party plan reviews and third-party building inspection go along with the permits, the increase in permit revenue that we've seen. There's been a lot of building going on and the need for a lot of inspections. We've also had some turnover in staff. So this has just been using third-party entities to help supplement that work that needed to be done there. And then Mountain Ridge Park Phase 2, this is the amount that we feel will be needed in fiscal year 24 to not finish up, but to start Phase 2. And then the rest of Phase 2 will be in fiscal year 25. Williams View, this is that contribution from other entities for the water project. Williams View, 11200 North participation. And then there's the 6800 West project in streets of 156. This was paid for with the MAG grant that we received into that fund. We're adding an exaction fee transfer to Parks Capital. This is to help with the paying for Mountain Ridge Park. TSSD collection and disposal fees. This is one that was kind of a recent discovery where we were analyzing some of our recent bills and noted that they are quite a bit higher than what we had expected. It's something that we are currently investigating and looking into to make sure that they're legitimate charges, but where this is our last chance to adjust the budget. If they are legitimate charges, we need to adjust the budget for it. So there's a chance we won't spend all of that, but.
So David, on that, is this just mainly coming off the trunk line over by the high school, or is it coming off all meters throughout the entire city?
Yeah, Jeff may be able to answer better where we're metered for
Is it
TSSD,
citywide,
but I believe it's
or
citywide.
was TSSD's money collecting citywide, or was it mainly on the trunk line over by Ridgeview and the high school?
I think there's 3 meters in total that come through Highland, so I think it would be a collective of all 3 of them.
Yeah, the increase that we saw does coincide with when we brought on the high school to run through our system to TSSD. So that's one of the angles that we're looking at to see if we were billed correctly when that came on, and then corresponding to that, if we are charging what we need to charge.
So there's a lift station that we've been working on in that area, and we recently made a connection around July, September-ish, over near the high school, and that's when we have started to see those increases. So just checking in through those fees with TSSD.
So if it turns out these are not legitimate fees, we'd still see the expense in 2024. We would just have a revenue for the refund in 2025?
Likely, yeah.
Okay.
Other items on here, water share assessments. This was a larger item, but we were able to scale it back based on some funding, outside funding for another entity that isn't coming through. But our assessments for water shares for the year are looking like they're higher than what we had budgeted, so we're adding 30,000 there.
We just made a comment that we're finding funding from outside. What type of outside source is helping us fund with water shares?
So there was a project that was going to happen that another entity was, I don't remember who it is it?
It was Pleasant Grove.
Pleasant Grove.
For the Weir rebuild, I believe.
Yeah, that they were going to use outside funding. Was it grant or?
Yeah, it was the NRCS, I believe, that was funding a big portion of that project.
So our participation for that project would have required the 4-year upfront payment of water shares. But where that funding fell through for them, the project at this point doesn't look like it's going to happen when they thought it was going to happen. We don't need to make that payment. So. And then the other changes that you'll see in the packet, like I said, there's multiple line items, are just various smaller adjustments to ensure that we're compliant with state budgeting law, that because we can't go over budget in any department without receiving a finding in our audit.
Sorry, back on the water share assessments for a minute. If we were planning on prepaying in fiscal year 24,
Yep.
My recollection is that that was in the ballpark of $200,000. Why are we only seeing a $30,000 if that's the significant driver for that?
Yeah, the $30,000 I think is unrelated. It's other purchases of water or other water assessments that we needed to pay for that are not related to that project.
I believe both irrigation companies that we receive a majority of our water from, they're raising their assessments this year, American Fork Irrigation and Lehigh Irrigation, in anticipation of this project that's going to happen someday. We're hoping next year it will come through. Just this year, the funding source fell through.
Okay, so that is my presentation. If there's any questions that the council has, we're happy to answer.
I just have a comment. It's always great when we have a bigger surplus, and year in and year out, we kind of underestimate how much sales tax and revenue we're going to get, and I'm sure that's because we're trying to be conservative. I am a little concerned, though, in much of the increased expenditures, and I think maybe we need to analyze that as an elected steward of the public's tax money. But as I just go through here, there's just a lot of line items that say wage costs, overtime costs, wage reallocation, benefits reallocation, third-party planning services, wage costs, benefits costs, overtime costs, wage costs. It seems like we could budget better for those things. I mean, if we're getting all these extra costs for wages and benefits and things that just show up when we're doing the end of the year reconciliation, why aren't they budgeted in the budget to start with? And I mean, you can't help with some of the overtime, like we had a lot of snow this year. I understand that. We've had a lot of other issues. But at the same time, it seems like we should be able to budget better for that. Because a lot of this expenditure is wages, overtime costs, and benefits.
Yeah.
And, I just don't understand that.
Yeah, like you said, overtime is difficult because things happen that we don't anticipate and require some extra time. I guess what I would say on like wages and benefits is that some of it has to do with turnover of staff, where we've hired somebody to replace somebody else, and maybe the offer was a little bit higher than what the previous person was making. That requires an adjustment. I mean, other than that, Aaron, do you have any thoughts?
No, a lot of it had to do with we had to replace an employee, and that necessitated not just wage adjustments for that position, but we had to make some other adjustments to maintain internal equity. And so we lowered other line items to try to make up for that. So in operations, but I absolutely agree with you, Councilmember Smith. We should be able to do better. And we are assuming, because right now our budget assumes our staff all stays. And I really hope that that's the case, but unfortunately the reality is that doesn't happen, and that's what's necessitated these changes. But I agree, I wish that they weren't all there.
What was explained to me, it's been hard. We're in an employment market, and sometimes when you went and hired a person from outside to come in, and yet you have a person that's been working here for 10 years, and they're coming in, you go, well, hold it. You got to move that 10-year person up to at least where you just hired that new person in, else there's an inequity that the employees start to feel. And I think that's where we're seeing some adjustments. I know with engineering, it depends on how much work we had come in. We had to send some out. We've been down to engineer. We lost our planner during the mid-year. So we've had, some of it.
Well, and some of that's included in this. Yeah. When we hired Rob.
Scott, I think it's a good question about, can we do better? So I know the mid-year adjustment happened actually in October, where, Aaron says, hey, now hiring this person, it's going to possibly cause an inequity, I'm not saying that word, inequitability across some other lines, and so we're going to have to adjust some wages. And so we were trying to do our best to come back, fill some jobs.
I'll mention one other thing that might help a little bit. Just a reminder that what we're showing here is budget adjustments that are necessary to remain compliant with state law. There could have been, in our review of all of the budgets for wages, that there are multiple accounts that are under budget, and that will end under budget. And it could be an issue with how we are allocating employees between the various different departments and funds, where some are coming in higher and some are coming in lower. But our priority in looking at these and doing this assessment is to make sure we're compliant with the state laws of not going over budget in any department. If I had more time and if I would have gone deeper into that, I probably could have identified multiple wage accounts where we will be under budget. So,
Speaking of allocations and wages, could you give us the 30-second explanation of why there are entries listed as decrease due to market wage study and merit in the adjustments?
yeah, so if you remember, our tentative budget had a flat 5% market increase for all employees. That was calculated in the budget with a formula that I had a cell that said 5%, and then a formula that said add 1 plus or multiply their current salary by 1 plus this cell. When we did our market study and finalized that, we determined that there were some employees that warranted a higher than 5% increase, some that didn't warrant an increase. And so rather than having that one formula for everyone, each individual employee has a separate formula built into their row. And in the process of doing that, we also added a 1% merit. So in the process of those formula changes, some rounding differences came to light. And so that's why you'll see some small dollar decrease in this wage line item is due to some of that rounding. Now, there were a couple of instances where the tentative budget had a salary or a wage amount for an employee that I know at least one case, an employee was put into the budget and then was terminated, left employment with the city. We hired a replacement at a lower amount. And so one of those decreases, I probably didn't label it very well, but it had more to do with that change of staff than it did the market study.
So you're currently talking about fiscal year 25.
Yeah.
But we're discussing adjustments to fiscal year 24, correct?
Correct. Yep.
So you're kind of jumping ahead.
Yeah, I just wanted to answer the question.
Oh, okay.
That was posed.
Other questions, council?
I move the city adopt the resolution amending the Highland City fiscal year 2023-2024 budget as shown in the included exhibit and as presented by staff.
Before we can vote on it, we have to have a public hearing. So I apologize on that. So at this time, we'll open up a public hearing for our financial year 2023-2024 final budget adjustments. Is there anyone who'd like to come up and address the council? Please. Your question was about PI, and that's still coming up with. We have like 6
Which
public.
year are they moving that 100 and?
That will be, I think the 108 you're talking about is going to be item number D, where we talk about the pressurized irrigation fund transfer. This doesn't have to do with that. So if that's specific to that, it will be item number D.
This is last year's budget.
So is it last year's?
Yeah, 24. We're just reconciliating at the end of the year.
So my question is.
If you'll make sure you're in the mic, just because we.
My question is, you've got a line item of $108,000 of the city's portion of the water.
Yes.
Why are you rolling it into a bond? Because we're already assessed that money.
Okay.
Why are we rolling it into a bond and accepting to pay the interest rate on that money?
Okay, I think I know that answer, but I'm going to give it back to our financial director.
Yeah, that is in a future item, but I will address it. So I'm curious to see where you read that it was being rolled into a bond. We are transferring the money that the general fund pays to the PI fund for use of water to water our parks. We're transferring it back out of the PI fund into the general fund to be used for whatever purposes the general fund needs. It just goes into the general fund balance. There's no use of it in a bond.
Laura, what we're saying is the parks are using pressurized irrigation water, and the city's general fund is paying for that pressurized irrigation. And we're making the parks, if you want to say the parks specific account, reimburse the city back, saying, hey, you're functioning with the parks account. We want you to reimburse because the city's general fund paid for it.
Okay.
But it doesn't go in, there's not a bond, there's nothing that is, there's no bond payment. We haven't been doing anything with the bonds for that. The bond for the pressurized irrigation was a bond that was taken out. We did redo that bond, 4 or 5 years ago. It was at a higher interest rate, and we refinanced it at a lower interest rate. We didn't incur any more debt.
And that bond has been paid
And it's paid off.
Okay.
Yeah. And so we're going to be out, the city should be out of debt by 2027. We have not incurred any new bond debt.
Okay.
Yeah, there's no new bond debt.
So it's not being rolled
No.
into that
No.
bond?
So there is no interest on that
Okay,
108.
that's what I
It's just
wanted
kind
to
of
know.
a transfer of one fund to another.
Okay.
And it's just how you do it financially, but
Yeah.
Okay,
Yeah.
so
No
we'll
new
never,
bonds.
yeah.
we can't use the pressurized irrigation fund to run the city. The city's funds are general funds that are just, you could put, well, hey, we can pay this. The problem is that fund that we could use for everything has been paying for all the water in the parks. We're saying, no, we want you to reimburse out of the pressurized irrigation fund.
Okay.
It's just, it takes
It's just a
restricted funds
transfer.
and
Okay.
unrestricted funds.
That's
yeah,
what I
essentially
wanted
it's
to
saying
know.
we're not
Sure.
paying for our own
That helped.
water.
I
Yeah.
wish, to be honest, I think it's awesome that you read it and you came and asked the question.
Thank you.
Well, and then there was another question I had about that too. Top of my head.
We have
can't
several
remember.
public hearings. You're going to be happy. You can
I
come up
can't
again.
remember the other question that I had about that same money that was issued. Oh, the idea of this water schedule. I really don't think that the city and churches should water on Saturdays and Sundays. My reasoning is there's nobody on staff on those days. I go down the highway an awful lot, and I'm seeing them watering the streets and everything else, and nobody's going after it.
So,
Just think of
Jeff,
that.
to reiterate what I just heard you say, hey, we have sprinkler systems that are kicking on Friday, Saturday, Sunday, which the city is not opening. Do we have staff that can look if we have something that's stuck on or we have a break? How do we address those during those days we're off?
Sure, we have a on-call personnel 24/7, 7 days a week, every day of the year. So if there is an issue that ever arises, you can call that phone number and they'll respond immediately to fix that.
But there's nobody attentively surveying and watching the different areas.
Right. I mean, yeah, the city's large, and I mean, on a day-to-day basis, a lot of things get
And somebody's
overlooked.
going to take out a minute in their Sunday to call you guys and tell you you're watering the street.
So that brings a question I have for Brooklyn. At one time, they were supposed to be able to text Yapify, and it would come in and we could take it to the right thing. Is that up and running correctly?
Are you talking about like reporting a concern?
Yeah.
Yeah, you can still do that.
Text this concern. Text it.
Yes, you can. Yeah. Do
So
you want the?
instead of calling, you can text it, and it goes.
Uh-huh.
It'll go to the appropriate person so they know what to.
But I don't want to be your babysitters.
Well,
know?
I would like to clarify though that like the main person running that is me, and I only I rarely check those over the weekend when I'm not working. So if you were going to text them on Friday, Saturday, Sunday, there's a chance I might not get to it until.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Because,
That was
and
kind
so the cities and the churches, it'd be a great idea if they did their watering when their staff is actually there.
Mm-hmm.
That's just an idea.
Thank you for the suggestion.
And then, is the city doing anything to conserve their water too that they've asked the citizens to do? So is the city's conserving with their green areas and that? We need to change some of, they have these wavy little sidewalks. I don't know who in the heck drives a bike like this. I have no idea. But they have all this grass area on the side and that they're watering. Well, why don't we put in colored rocks or something, that would actually
So I'll
not
answer.
drink
Some
water?
of it going to the Xeriscape or to the natural scape, that is very costly to convert.
Yeah.
We are doing the new park. You'll notice that a lot of that front
It
is
is.
all that. So we've tried to look, as we're putting in some new landscaping, we do require, like if you go over by the high school where what you call is our parkway detail, which is between,
Yeah.
you'll notice that has more
That
of a
is.
rock feel.
Mhm.
And so as we start to make some changes, we are
Okay.
implementing that. It's just, it's costly to do.
Because it's like you're asking the citizens to do something, and then you guys are doing the opposite.
Well, so you, like where your home's at, you're able to keep your rest, but if you came in, we are encouraging as you transfer things. The city is, as we build new stuff, we are trying to do more xeriscape.
What are they doing about changing the old stuff?
That, we don't have a budget in place for the old stuff.
As part of our pressurized irrigation metering project, we are trying to equip all our parks and park open spaces to smart water clocks, which will help with that. Somebody can actually adjust the clock via their phone instead of physically going to that site. There's over 200 parks, so our one park employee that is over sprinklers has a hard time getting to all of those in a day, where with the smart clocks, it will adjust according to weather, and also he can shut things, turn things on and off remotely also. So
I
that's
do
something
notice
in
that the
process.
churches have actually cut back on their watering too.
I'm sorry, what?
have noticed that the churches have actually cut back on their watering too.
Yeah.
But the
what they're
cities have
saying is
not.
these smart clocks help us. We have 200 stations throughout this city.
No, 200 parks, and
Oh.
each park has,
Oh.
I mean, the cemetery alone has, I think, over 100 stations.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of adjustments that need to be made on a storm event or something. So hopefully these smart clocks will assist in that conservation greatly.
Anyway, but thank you. Any other
It's-
questions on the budget? Any budget adjustments we're doing?
No, I was just asking, is there gonna be like a limit that they're gonna charge for culinary water for the water users? I lived here for 30 some odd years, 35 years. I had irrigation water, and I was provided irrigation ditches, which you guys took out. And so I had no way of getting the water. I was told, we'll do pressurized irrigation, and we'll only give you a minimum amount of charge because of taking out my water ditches. And now the price is increasing, and they're they told me, oh, it'll only be a few years. Well, it's been 35 years. I don't know what they count 30 or a few years, because 35 years is not a few years. But anyway, how much are they going to keep increasing on that?
So what you're talking about is a tiered watering system, like if you overuse water tier. In the newsletter, and we've been trying to share with it, what will happen on the tier system is we're putting meters in, and it's state mandate, we get meters on all of our secondary water. And then by the federal grants that we've taken, we have to provide a tier system for those who are overusing it. Where we'll take this entire year to get all the meters put in. Starting next summer, so May of 2025, we will then read all the meters during that season, and then the council will come back and make decisions based off of that
You're
data.
going to pay us for what we don't use?
Probably,
No.
it's like right now, I understand.
I don't doubt that.
It's the same question I
It
had
was
about
just a
pressurized.
sin-
Why
it
am
was
I
a
paying
silly
during the
question.
winter? I don't use it.
It was just a silly question for anyone.
Anyway, thank you, Laura, for coming.
Laura, can you please tell me what your last name is? Ross, thank you.
Scott, did you have a?
I just have a question before the motion's been made and I believe seconded.
We haven't, I don't think we've had a second.
Okay, I haven't had a second. Let me ask a couple questions. So we have this in the adjustments here for fiscal year 24. We have this surplus, 300 plus, and you said anything above the 35% goes into Highland City Capital Roads Fund, Capital Park Fund, and the Capital Building Fund. I've been going through this, and I can't figure out how much you put into those three funds from fiscal year 24 surplus. It's probably in your list. I'm just not seeing it.
So that's one where we don't have to specifically budget that amount. In the ordinance for the adjustments, there's a section that states that by adopting, maybe it's not an ordinance, resolution, by adopting the resolution, you are agreeing that we can,
Right.
whatever we need to maintain that 35% or stay below that 35%, the staff can do that transfer, but we don't necessarily give you that exact, we still don't know exactly until the audit occurs and we are able to reconcile all of our accounts, and the auditor verifies that they're correct. That's when we'll know that dollar amount. And we
Okay, so you won't make these transfers till after the audit, which is what, September?
Yeah, September,
Okay,
October.
and then you'll know exactly how much you exceeded 35%, then you'll put it in that. Okay, I was trying to, okay.
Yeah, I mean,
very
we
good.
have an idea,
I should
and
know
during
that.
during the budget agenda item, I actually have an estimate of what that could be, but it's just an estimate. It could change between now and October.
Okay.
Okay, if there's nothing else, let's go ahead and we'll now be ready for a motion.
I think we had the motion.
So we had, Ron made the motion.
Yes,
Do we have a second?
Scott seconded it.
Scott seconded. Okay. If there's no other further discussion, we'll now make the, so it was Ron and Scott.
That's fine.
That is passes 5-0. We'll now move on to our resolution of the fee schedule, and that will be Candace.
Thank you, Mayor. Okay, I just want to start off with the document that I uploaded was outdated, meaning that any font changes that happened, everything in red, it was just the nature of opening it up and trying to edit it. So half those things in red didn't relate to the changes made, and we'll go through that. And I do want to thank Doug, council member, to come in this morning and talk to me about it so I could fine tune it. There are a few things that were missed because of the changes, so we'll go over those. Each year we adjust, review, and make those changes, those adjustments to the fee schedule, and that's what we want to talk about today. Okay.
So are you going to summarize the increases then?
Exactly.
Because I studied this last night and I couldn't make heads or tails. I'm really sorry.
No,
Yeah.
I'm grateful for Doug.
Okay.
So I appreciate it. Highlighting each section, we have building, just updating the name from the International Code Council. I had building in there, and Jason asked that I remove that and make it more in line with what it is. Added a residential construction refundable bond of $2,500. And that is for homes that have received their certificate of occupancy that are making additional changes to help protect those assets. Solar deposit, $90. We've never had a deposit for solar, although as you can imagine, it's very popular and we've needed it for a long time. We also added a couple of meter sizes, Jeff, right? For the culinary, there's an additional 1 inch. And Jeff went through and did an assessment based on our costs. And that's what those highlighted. Okay, and same with the PI. Business licensing, we found that we have been overcharging Alpine Country Club per the state code. It caps at $300 and we've been billing them $400 for a very long time. So with the update to the liquor license class A and B, we brought that in line to make sure that it matched. Administrative fee, I want to get rid of it with the new software. So let me back up. Those who had no impact, so they were exempt per the Utah State Code, they weren't eligible for any fees unless they needed a printed license or a physical license. With the new software, it generates it on its own. And there are a lot, in fact, most exempt businesses do require a printed license that they can take to the bank and get their funding, get their account set up, that kind of thing. This will allow them to do that on demand. Food trucks, I did want to highlight, in the code, in the fee schedule last year, it stated that food trucks, any mobile business would need a business license from Highland City. Per state code, that is not the case. I think you all saw that. So the only one that they're eligible for is the temporary use permit, and I just called that out. And then lastly, the business license appeal fee. It's rare that it comes up that we deny a business license, but when it does, we want to give them an avenue, and it does cost time to staff. Cemetery, 3% increase. This is an annual increase year over year. Rentals, I did increase all fees across the board. Residents, I increased by $10. Non-residents from $25 to $50. Nonprofit increased from $5 to $10. Same with government. Food fee went from $50 to $100. Piano went from $10 to $20, and projector fee increase went from $10 to $20.
But what you're saying is the Arts Council, if they're renting the building over there, they're paying $10. Is that right?
No, they get everything for free. In fact,
But it says government increase.
it's for reserving the facility apart from the Arts Council. Does that make sense?
It's a-
Like Alpine School District or,
It's a non-Highland government.
what's that?
Correct.
It's rare, but the school districts do ask to reserve the community center from time to time.
And we're increasing the fees because,
A few reasons. We have upgraded quite a bit in the building, so it's to cover costs and when they're using the projector and things like that here. So to more bring things in line that way.
with the
and-
upgrades.
Right. So the upgrades, and also we did an audit of all of the surrounding cities, and we are by far the lowest, which is why we get used the most. So we brought everything in line a little bit more. We are still under every other city. Events, we had a few changes. The baby celebration increased to 15. The late registration went to 17. And we also noticed that the disc golf tournament, the trilogy set, and the without trilogy were backwards. So those were corrected with this fiscal year. Planning and zoning, Rob may want to speak to these if you have any questions, but conditional use permit, the CUP amendment, we added that for $250. Non-conforming use structure and application, we added that. That was $100. And zoning letter, added that for $100. And that's more a formalized letter for zoning specifically that they want to be able to take to developers and if they need that, right? Correct, Rob?
Correct. Every once in a while, we'll get a request that, the run-of-the-mill questions of someone that's calling, say, hey, what are my setbacks or what are this? That's easy to answer. But sometimes someone wants a definitive answer of, I am zoned this and I am entitled to do this type of business on the property, likely because they want to get funding of some kind. So because that requires actual work to put a letter together rather than just giving an answer over the phone or they walk in person. They want something formal. We ask them to submit a fee for that. We had one where they asked, give us all records of any non-compliance issues with one of the commercial lots over at the Macy's side and pull building inspections and confirm that this is zoned for this type of use. It's like we didn't actually have a way of processing that, so we wanted to set that up going forward.
Now, this is kind of jumping back up to your miscellaneous, and this could just kind of laugh. We might have some apple trees. I noticed we have the garden annual boxes. Aaron, do we need to add that they could do an apple tree over in Wild Rose?
We could, but we haven't really decided on what that fee is. So we can bring that to you when we're ready to do that, Mayor.
In the agenda packet, the zoning letter is listed as $50, and on the presentation here, it's listed as $100, which is correct.
I think it's $50 is what I had proposed.
And Public Works, hydrant meter rental refundable deposit is $2,200. That is the replacement cost if I don't misunderstand, if something is damaged. Hydrant meter water charges will match residential rates. Prior to this, they were paying $1 per thousand, which was definitely not in line with what residents had been paying or pay. Right-of-way, non-excavation, we called that out and added those fees. Road cuts, we also called those out specifically. Utility charges for garbage, recycle, and miscellaneous charges increase per the waste management increases.
Can I ask a question?
Yeah.
So we rent out our hydrants?
Not the hydrant specifically, but a meter that connects to the hydrant meter to fill pools, to fill trucks, for projects across the city or even just their own.
Yeah, it's for mainly for construction water. Like when contractors come in and do development, they use a lot of water. So we'll rent out those meters. They hook it to a fire hydrant. They can turn that hydrant on and leave it on and utilize the meter to function instead of operating the hydrant up and down all day long. And if they do damage or break those meters, they are about that much money to replace.
So this is
that's-
basically developers. Do you ever
The
have private
developers
citizens come in and want to?
for swimming pools and such.
swimming pools.
Yeah, but mainly developers and residents with swimming pools.
And then do we charge them for that water based on the meter readings?
Yeah, it's that same, the next line down, the hydrant meter water
Good.
charges will match the residential rates.
And last but not least, we've never charged fees for special events. So this year, we are asking for an application fee. And already, if they require police or fire, they call that out in their fee schedule, and we assess that individually with them. But Parks and Streets has never been compensated for any extra time that they spend cleaning up after events. And so we only feel, or we feel it's only fair to pass that on to the parties asking for the special event rather than the citizens of Highland. The refundable deposit that we're asking for is $500, which takes the place of any other facility rental deposit. And last but not least, a late fee if they request a quick turnaround time, which does happen quite a bit, especially with filming permits.
Okay, so let's just kind of walk through. I come in, I want to rent the pavilion at a park. I think it was $40 for the full day for a resident. And I give you a check for $500?
No, this is only for special events. So
Okay,
a special
I
event.
just want to make sure where it was at. Okay.
Yeah, yep.
Wait, so like if you have a race, like a 5K race or something like that, it says assessed by public safety department. So are we having our public safety also charge to be able to do that? Mm-hmm. And how much is it for public safety? Because I have Parks and Streets here.
So the fee schedules for Lone Peak, public safety, the police and fire have their own fee schedules.
Okay.
So if you want to say an ambulance at a race, it's $180 an hour. That's the ambulance plus 2 paramedics.
Do you charge a fee for having police officers mitigating traffic there as well?
Yeah, they have an hourly rate. Our Lone Peak board just adopted this in their last meeting. I'm trying to look it up real quick to see what their hourly rate is there.
Okay. Perfect. And then aside from that, Parks and Street crew. Okay.
Any questions?
Yeah. On the refundable deposit of renting a facility. So let's say someone wants to rent the community center for a piano recital. We charge them $500 right up front.
No, this is for special events, which are more like races, weddings. So those bigger events that, not the everyday reservation time.
How do you determine the definition? Where is that defined? I mean, a lot of people, if you have a big piano recital, they think it's a special event. So I just wonder, do you just say, oh no, this is a bigger thing, we got to charge you a bigger deposit? I mean, are you the one that makes that determination?
With all of the department heads. It depends on the group size, it depends on the type of activities that they are holding. A recital, there's not much going on. I know that they used to require insurance about 10 years ago, which we no longer require. These are events that are more risky in nature, so races, athletic events, timed events that require a police officer to be there on street corners. I don't think I've ever had a special event permit except for a fundraiser one time at the community center in all the time that I've been here at Highland.
So I oftentimes, where I live, see the police out on like the corner of Alpine and Canal Boulevard because there's a bike race or there's those things. And if it comes in the city of Highland, they have to pay this then?
Yes.
Even though it may be sponsored out of adjacent city.
Right.
Because there's a lot of crossover between AF and Highland.
Mm-hmm. Yep, no, there absolutely is. In fact, when I did the study on special events, 50 to 60% are athletic events, whether it's a bike race up Suncrest or Temp Half that comes down this way. And then in Highland itself, we are not part of the full half, but they have 5Ks and 10Ks going on at the same time in Highland going into American Fork, or the triathlons that start at the pool in American Fork, and then they hop on their bikes and then they finish up. So you're right, a lot of it is happening or beginning outside of Highland. Highland doesn't see any of those admission fees at all. So it becomes a situation where we don't benefit a whole lot. And I'm not saying that we're looking for revenue stream, because we don't. That's not what we've ever done. This is mainly to compensate and protect what we've got here in Highland in case something does happen.
Well, and to pay for, I mean, back to your point earlier, Councilmember Smith, these often happen on weekends, and so it's to pay for the overtime of those employees to be there. So a parks crew would take about $50 an hour if somebody had to be there extra on the weekend to accommodate this kind of an event. Or police, I was just looking, it's $95 an hour to have a police officer there if they need to close a road, for example, to accommodate a race.
But I guess we didn't answer the question. If it's sponsored out of a neighboring city, which a lot of times these things are out of American Fork, do we then charge this fee if Lone Peak's involved?
Yes, if they are requiring, or if we are requiring one of our employees to be there because of the nature of their event. So special events are things that go above and beyond, like they change the use of public spaces, a sidewalk, a road, a park, something like that, to the point that a general public member can't use that space normally. And so if we say your event is big enough, or if they ask for us to have an ambulance there or a police officer there, we charge them because it's us going above our normal duties to do that. So we have to pay overtime for those individuals.
Oh, I understand that, but Courtney just said we don't benefit from this. And I just wonder how it works with adjacent cities. The minute the race is planned into Highland or something, then they need to fork over $500.
As a $500 deposit, is that right, Candace? Right. And then, so $25 to apply to work with us, just because Candace takes the application and she routes it to a whole bunch of departments to make sure we're all okay with it and don't have concerns. And then if they want to hire one of our employees to help coordinate with their event, that's when they have to pay an hourly rate in addition. So it doesn't matter where the event starts, it just matters, does it touch Highland public property in a way that we need to do extra work to mitigate your impacts.
Just to clarify, Councilmember Smith, the $500 deposit is just for facility rental, if that's part of their special event.
Well, I'm just wondering, I'm just kind of confused because we're charging these fees. I just wondered when we charge them and how much the city gets basically on those and how it works, because, I'm just confused because I hear two different things here.
So that, there's this Tour de France that maybe comes through that might come through Alpine and come through High. Are you saying that they have to go to each city and say, hey, if we're going to have police, we want you to, have they been doing that in the past?
We did have Tour de Utah come through Highland, I think in 2018, 2019, in that area. They actually contracted with UHP for the road closures. But coming through Highland, we still had to make sure everyone was good with it. Our ordinances, our rules, our statutes are called out, and we tell them this is what you need to do. This is our concern, and then we address it at that time. We didn't charge them any fees at all. So, yeah. So, does that help answer any questions? Are there any others?
I have one more question back on page 7, and Jeff, this is probably a you question. That the bond for non-excavation or for road cuts, that is to protect us in the event that damage is done that we need to repair. Is that
correct? Or if they walk away from the project and just leave it half finished, it's enough money to finish the project.
It seemed strange to me that the bond for a non-excavation for cutting a curb, for example, is the same as the bond for cutting a road. Isn't there a significantly higher risk and potential cost to us when somebody has cut a road?
I can answer this because I had this conversation with Andy. The answer is yes. It's more of our historical bond for roads has been $1,000, and it was more of us stepping it up. 2,500 is where we want to land for the non-excavation fees, and we're going to keep increasing the road excavation fees to actually match the costs. It was more we didn't want to jump from 1,000 to 5,000 or 7,000 in a couple of weeks. So it was more of we're going to match the two, and then we'll look at keep increasing that to make sure we are covering our risk.
Hey Candace, are you allowed to have an event on Sunday? No, I'm just curious.
You know, I've never had anyone ask for a Sunday. I don't know. That's never, ever come up.
I thought I remembered like a motorcycle event one time that blocked off the whole.
Yeah,
not permitted.
there was one. It came out of the canyon. They blocked off all the roads for it.
Yeah, but
I was just curious.
But that's a state road, and it was the highway patrol that blocked them off. I remember they came through. They had hundreds of motorcycles going up AF Canyon, but it's a state road. SR 92 is the state road going up the AF Canyon.
Building permits aren't part of this schedule, but I assume those are being done by the International Residential Code from the ICC. Is that correct?
Yes, sir. They have a standard that we follow. For that.
And there's always updates every year, but every state is different in terms of which ones they use for the IBC and the IRC. Do we follow the state requirement for that, or do we have our own?
The state, for fees, we could adopt our own. Currently, they have a kind of default template for fees that many cities use.
Right.
Not every city in Utah uses it.
But if we say we're following ICC, which we do, the International Code Council, part of that is the IRC and the IBC and all the other CCCs.
Though the
I think we have to specify which ones of those we're using and what year it applies.
The specific edition is set by the state. The state adopts its 2021 building code, but like 2018 for like the pool and spa code. And they have different numbers, and they'll update them every once in a while. Recently, we just jumped from 2018 residential and building code to the 2021 version, and we're still getting developers to switch over the two.
Yeah.
We're always a little behind the state of Utah as a whole in reluctant in adopting new requirements, honestly, at the state
you
level.
You ought to see Texas. I mean,
Are
Texas
they really
a few years ago was 1980.
Oh, so it could be worse.
And Alaska is very behind. They're very reluctant to adopt the new ones when they come out. So.
I have two potential changes that I emailed out and dropped off a printed copy for everybody that I would like to discuss. On page 16 of the fee schedule, for the hydrant meter water change, we're changing it to match residential rates, which is a significant improvement from the $1 per 1,000 gallons that we had before. But when we're talking about residential rates, that's someone who has dedicated water to the city. When we're talking about extra residential uses through a hydrant meter, that would be a case where there hasn't been water dedicated to the city for that purpose. It seems to me.
So for culinary, there's not water dedication for pressurized irrigation. Am I thinking correct?
No, they're dedicated for both.
Yeah,
so you have to bring in a certain amount for culinary and also irrigation.
But I mean, it's for normal culinary use, not the construction use before the culinary use, to Councilmember Courtney's point.
It's just with development, most of the time we only care about the irrigation dedication because part of the old Highland, we had a lot of water when we absorbed the old district that handled all the culinary for this area. But there are areas that when they annex in, for example, up at near Beacon Hills, if that area comes in, we'll likely need culinary dedications from them because they weren't part of that previously.
So, but when they developed Ridgeview, they had to donate so many acre feet pressurized irrigation and so many acre feet culinary.
Exactly. That's a good example of another place that wasn't part of the old Highland Conservancy District.
Right.
So we had them bring in both, as Jeff said.
The water company.
So coming back to what Doug's question is that we are allowing those who have dedicated, there's the same rate for if there's a person that dedicated versus someone that's not. And you're asking for the council what the feedback, you're proposing 150.
My thought was 150%. If it turns out that the majority, the significant majority of cases are development, then to Aaron's point, I think it's just a question of when the dedication happens. That they're going to dedicate water to the city, but we haven't gotten there yet.
When they're using it, it's not.
When they're using it, so.
Well, if they're under construction, they would have dedicated water at this point to us.
A lot of times they have. When they come in to develop, they've already dedicated the water. Once in a while, they're a little lagging in getting the water, but before they can finalize the development, they have to have all the water provided.
But there are, like, there's some users down 9600 or 6800 West that that are on our culinary that we haven't received water shares from. And maybe I'm off, maybe they have.
That's a good question.
Does that make sense? They're hooked up to our city water. They're getting the benefit of all the city, and yet they haven't paid a share. They haven't gotten the shares. They probably haven't even paid a hookup fee yet. Maybe they had to pay a hookup to get on. But that's, I think, what Doug's talking about, is you might have some county users that are on our water that they're benefiting.
And that's actually the next change I'd like to see, is the county users. If it turns out that most of the time the folks using the metered hydrant have already dedicated shares, then I'm perfectly good with using the same rates. I was thinking that we were dealing with a case where, generally speaking, it was an extra residential use where we hadn't gotten any dedicated water yet.
Yeah, typically it's in the process or it's already dedicated when they started to develop.
Okay. Certainly, anyone else is open to a different opinion on this, but that being the case, I don't feel any need to change the fee schedule with regard to item 1.
Oh, item 1. Okay.
So
you're going back to 100% then?
As a general rule, in terms of water rates, you can set different rates for different types of users. So you could make a reasonable distinction between hydrant users, because that's not this is culinary water. So we intend that to be potable water. It's treated to a certain level or comes out clean at a certain level, meant for indoor uses. And hydrant uses are typically not for that. It's either construction or it's a swimming pool, which you do want it to be clean water, obviously. You could make that distinction if you wanted. One restriction under state law is you can't make a distinction on water rates simply because someone is inside or outside of your boundaries, but you can if there's additional costs or efforts involved in serving other people. So.
Well, then perhaps you have made my item 2 very easy, which is that it seems wrong to me that county users of our water system pay less than Highland resident users.
I agree.
And I think the rate should be the same as for the Highland users.
I agree. I agree with that. I agree. Can I ask a question? I haven't thought much about people filling their swimming pools with fire hydrant water. How often is that happening, Jeff, if you just had to make an estimate?
Candace may have a better knowledge of that, how often it gets rented out for hydrant meters.
10 to 20 per year, at least, yeah.
10 to 20 per year?
Most people want the convenience of the quick water instead of running a hose and letting it fill up for 24 hours or however long it takes. So they just want to get it in, get it loaded quickly, and that's what the hydrant meter allows them to.
So what do we do in years? I mean, this year's been a good water year. What do we do in the drought years? I mean, we're always kind of worried about pressurized irrigation. Is there just unlimited culinary water to fill? Because everybody's building pools now. So it seems like to me there's going to be a big drain on the culinary water. Do we have any rules or regulations or, gee, the culinary water system, the pressure's down, we can't fill your pool? Do we ever discuss any of that?
I may not be as knowledgeable as I should be on this, but once they fill those pools, typically they stay full. They'll cover them and they'll just treat them and maintain them for the duration of the pool unless there's maintenance to be done. So a lot of times it's a one-time fill, and possibly later, several years later, it's a refill once they have to make some adjustments to the pool. But I don't think it's a every year process of refilling.
It's not, if you have a pool, your chemicals, if you really have a good chemical system, you're almost your own
So you don't refill your pool every year?
But and I always thought, okay, you're gonna do it every 5 to 7 years. Like my pool, I've had the water in there, and as long as you keep your chemicals right, and you have a filtration system that's already filtering the pool, it really, and now some will say, oh, it feels better. As long as you have good chemical control.
Don't you lose some with evaporation? Do you just manage that with?
Sure.
Your pool will go down. If you have the open, it's going to evaporate. So they're going to fill up their pool with water.
And they'll have automatic fill valves that if they'll adjust with the drop or the evaporation, they'll automatically fill.
Okay.
I will say I have known cities in bad drought years to put those kinds of restrictions. We
They
don't have them
strictly
currently.
can't.
I've written water restrictions that said you cannot use culinary water for any outdoor watering or features or pools because we don't have the water. If it
Well,
gets to
hopefully
that
we don't
point-
have to do that, but I just wondered if we had anything in place.
Not currently but we could if it came to it.
So so let me ask you if we've come across this. These are individuals coming to the city asking to get our meter hooked up to the fire hydrant. I have known of some companies that have their own hookups. What if with that they just hook up and they have their own hoses and they go and fill the pools? Because I've seen a couple that have done that. What have we noticed with that, Jeff? If we see that,
If we see it, we definitely stop and we address that situation. But yeah, we only have limited personnel. So if anybody sees it, yeah, notify us and we will go approach them because we need to capture the usage of that water, not only for the money aspect, it's for reporting. We need to account for all that water that's being used in our system each year
Right.
to the state.
It gets you. Now the question is, when I filled my pool, we didn't call the city, we called the fire department. So is the fire department also doing this service?
No, we used to, but we don't anymore.
I mean, that's who, I remember we called the fire department. They'd bring out, hook it up, fill us up, and, so.
Right, we're trying to get a little bit more accurate with our water reporting. So this was one of the things that we addressed, and that's why we are seeing an increase in rentals of these hydrant meters for swimming pools because the fire department's not allowed to do that anymore because we need to capture that usage.
So with that, Rob, Scott brought up, if we're in a drought year, is that something we have to remember as a council to say, hey, next year's a drought year, we're now not going to rent out the meters? And is that how we would stop the filling of the pools?
We would stop renting out the meters and put a citywide restriction on the use of, culinary water for outdoor use. We generally do worry about pressurized irrigation because that's the difference of usage of water between watering a lawn versus internal consumption is drastic. So we use a lot more water outside than we do indoors. So we have a lot of water, generally for our culinary uses. So we're generally not worried. In a bad water year, if our wells start to fail, that's why our water years don't depend on typically snow melt. All of our wells our culinary water are from our wells, so it's groundwater. And we've dug some very deep wells, and hopefully those will support us for a long time to come. If it does come up, we can figure out ways of addressing it.
So let's go back to what you were talking about here, Doug. It sounds like the council's in favor of, was option number 2, where if they are a county resident, at least their rates are the same as residential rate.
I'll support that.
So when we make the motion, if we want to say those rates are the same, is that just adding that to the motion?
Let me just clarify. So I think the county residents do pay the same rates currently.
The base rate is listed as the same. The first incremental rate is 2 cents per 1,000 gallons lower, and there is no third incremental rate listed in the fee schedule.
Say yes. For county, just make the county water usage rate the same as Highland resident usage rate, and that's an easy tweak to make.
Candace, there were a couple of things that in the packet looked like they had been omitted. The hobby breeder renewal rate, for example, and there were 1 or 2 others that I'm not remembering right offhand.
Yeah.
Do we need to include those changes, those additions in any motion that we make as well, or?
From the packet, that would be a Rob question, but I did go in and correct those in the final version.
Yeah, do you know what those were? Do you remember off the top of your head, Candace, besides hobby breeders?
I do have them. Okay. So the hobby breeder was the first one.
It was the hobby breeder renewal, I think.
Yes, the renewal. And then the business license fire department reinspection fee, we added that back in. Trying to see if there's any others. I think those were the only ones that were omitted from our discussion earlier.
In that case, I will move that the Highland City Council approve the fee schedule as printed with the two additions that Candace just read and with the amendment to change the culinary water rates for county residents to match the resident rate listed in the fee schedule.
I'll second that.
I have a motion by Doug, second by Ron. Any further discussion?
Yeah, can I ask or make a request? So, Courtney, and I know this is a complex thing, but you know, if we go ahead and prove this, and I like your summaries, I appreciate it very much, but could we actually get a clean copy of all the actual fees? I mean, you could email it to us or, you know, give it to us so that we can understand the fees a little better.
I'd be happy to.
Yeah, I really would. And then I'd also, David, the fees when they're collected are going to come into different funds under different categories. It might be nice, I know you got lots to do, but it'd be nice once in a while to kind of see how much money we're collecting. I mean, they're in different categories, but just overall how many fees we're collecting. And does that make sense? I mean, because we've got all this fee chart, but they go into different funds. And it'd just be nice to see, hey, we're getting special event fees, we're getting this and that, because I like, you know, in the development fees, that's a different category, of course, but I never know exactly how many special events are coming in and all those different things. It'd be nice to have a summary once in a while.
Okay. Yeah, that would be, I think we're going to do quarterly financial reports to the council, so I'll try and make sure that that's visible.
Based on past history, I will observe that we're going to try to do quarterly financial reports to the council. We may put it off past the quarter point.
The goal is to do quarterly.
Yes.
Okay, we still have a motion before us. That passes 5-0. We're now moving on to resolution item number 3A, which is a certified tax rate. That's also you, David.
Thank you. Okay, I wanted to start out by showing you where we currently are. If we go to the next slide. So this is our fiscal year 24 certified rate. So I included on here the calculation that the county does when they determine the rate. They assess the rate value, and then they will divide the budgeted revenue by that rate value to come up with the rate. Now the budgeted revenue would be calculated using a baseline that the county has for Highland, and then with any additional growth that has happened during the year. So for fiscal year 24, our current fiscal year, our certified rate was 0.000794. So if you go on to the next slide, this is the new proposed certified rate. So you can see our proposed tax rate value went up by about 100 million. Part of that was due to growth, and part of that would be due to just increases in value. And the rate barely changed at all. It's about the smallest amount it can change. It'd still be different. So the city portion of that is a 0.000689, and the library portion did not change at all at 0.000104 for a combined certified rate of 0.000793. That is what was calculated by the county and what we propose be adopted by the council.
How is it the library rate didn't change, but the other did?
I think the change was just so minor to the general rate that because the library is a smaller portion of the taxable value or the tax rate, that it just
I don't mind it at all.
It just didn't round
Give
up.
them a net
Basically
increase.
the general city rounded up by 0.000001
Yeah.
or down, and the library was small enough that it didn't round either way.
I have a question. It says number 6, it says maximum by law. Is that what we passed? I mean, at the time when we passed it, that was?
No, this is just a statewide requirement. No municipality can enact a rate higher than 0.007. So we're well below that.
So you're telling us all the property in Highlands worth over $3 billion? Is that what this says?
Yeah, and I believe this is would be the taxable value, not necessarily the market
not the
value. So
sellable.
for residential, actual values, market values would be higher than that due to the exemption
Sure.
of the, 45%.
I'll make the motion if we're ready. I move that City Council approve the resolution adopting the fiscal year 2024-2025 certified tax rate of 0.000793, which includes 0.000689 for city operations and 0.000104 for library operations.
I'll second it.
I have a motion by Cam and so much second by Scott. Okay, that passes 5-0. We'll now move on to item number 3D, which is a public hearing and resolution for the pressurized irrigation fund transfer. David.
Thank you. I feel bad that our resident left and doesn't get to hear this, but we've already talked about it. So this is a snapshot, a screenshot, whatever you want to call it, from our newsletter for June. So we're required to notice this transfer in the newsletter, send a notice to utility customers with their utility bills. And as was discussed, we are proposing that the $108,000 that the city pays to water open space like parks and park strips, that be transferred back into the general fund. Overall, that represents a 1.35% of the PI budget for fiscal year 25.
Do we need a public hearing for this?
Yep. Is there any questions you guys have?
No.
I have one, but
okay,
but
we'll
not a question.
We'll now open this up for public hearing. Public hearing is open. Is there anyone who'd like to come up? Anyone? Seeing none, we'll now close it, bring it back to the council.
I'm not personally wildly in favor of this transfer. Having it come out of the general fund seems like the right place because that is where we manage our parks. And moving it into the PI system means that we now have schools and churches paying to water our parks instead of residents paying to water our parks. And it means that we're not getting any benefit of sales tax to help pay for part of that. I'm not going to make a super strong argument against it, but I don't love this transfer, and I'll be voting against it.
So let's go through the reason you're doing this is because so we have a pressurized irrigation fund, and it's generating, and what we're saying is that pressurized irrigation fund, we're using that pressurized irrigation fund to water the parks. And
essentially, we are charging ourselves for water, and then we are reimbursing ourselves for the water that we charged ourselves.
Which is really just an accountability measure.
Essentially, it's
on our part.
The general fund doesn't want to pay for the water it's using. We want to use that money for something else that we want to do in the general fund. So it really is a policy decision of whether the council wants those funds to be in the general fund to use for other things, or if we want to keep it in the PI fund. But we do show it, even though it's just going in and then coming back out for accounting purposes. We show, the city is using this water, it's revenue to the PI fund, but then for whatever purposes the city council wants to use that money, we're moving it back into the general fund.
Or
to
we
use it
could
for other
we
purposes.
could not send $108,000 to the pressurized irrigation fund and just keep it in the general fund. Does that make sense? If we
Yeah, the reason we're showing it going from the general fund to the PI fund is because we use the water and we want to show that the city is using some of the water and that we're paying the PI fund for it. So I think it's good for us to show that for transparency purposes.
Exactly.
And I
And
thought
then
we
it's
were-
just a policy decision for whatever reasons the council might want to or might not want to do that transfer back. It's definitely in some jurisdictions a sensitive topic or controversial topic where residents feel like the enterprise funds are subsidizing the general fund too much. Some cities rely on that because their tax revenues aren't sufficient to pay for all of their operations in the general fund. And so they just do flat percentage transfers. They don't even tie it to anything directly. It's just a percentage transfer. We're going to take 10% of our culinary water and move it into the general fund because we can and we need the money in the general fund. This is very minor compared to that, and really is just saying.
So how are you
we-
equating 108,000? I mean, 108. How do we come up with that?
That's
number?
just an estimate, and we've used the same estimate for a number of years and haven't updated it. So we probably should analyze that and see if it's still accurate. But it's,
I mean, but if it's going back and forth, it doesn't really matter because it's a net zero. But at one point, it was calculated based on the current PI charge at that time, based on the number of square feet we water. So,
Well, I think this was a big calculation on a spreadsheet that was done and saying, hey, that's how much acreage we have.
Exactly.
So
Yeah.
are we putting meters on the city?
Yeah, I was just going to ask that question. So then you change things based on those meters, do you not? Because you'll have
We would-
meters on all the,
We would know our
You'll have
usage.
actual numbers.
you know, have actual numbers.
yeah, I believe we meter them, but I don't believe we bill ourselves based on the meter readings. I'd have to double check on
Well, we
that,
don't
but-
We
bill
don't
on the
currently have
meters
any
yet.
meters installed, but we will be installing them with this project, so we'll have to determine how we're gonna handle it
Okay.
at that time.
So we
Yeah,
haven't
it's in the
installed meters
future.
yet for PI.
Not on,
Cities-
not on the
city.
city.
So, David, basically, this is transferring money from a restricted fund to an unrestricted fund, right? Am I understanding that correct? So we can
Yeah,
use.
I don't know if you would consider it an enterprise fund,
into
a business type fund, so
Right.
not necessarily totally restricted, but we can transfer the money. We're allowed to as long as we go through this process of
And
holding a
show the
public hearing
accountability
and-
for it.
and being
Let-
transparent about
Let's go
it.
back. So the money that went into the pressurized irrigation fund is coming from all users. And I think what you're saying, Doug, is you have the church, you have schools are paying that. However, our parks, the churches and schools do use our parks. A lot of those youth groups and a lot of the things do go to our park. I'm just, I can see, I get your point going,
Yeah, it doesn't strike me as something that has a slam dunk answer one way or the other. I come down on I would prefer not to transfer it back side, but I'm reasonably close to the fence. I don't think it's a.
I prefer the transfer because it gives the accountability, it gives the transparency of this is the actual cost, this is what is going in. I would like to see it refined a little better, maybe from the meter once we get that, and we transfer that amount, and then we transfer it back. But by transferring it, we've got a line item that we're able to say this is where the money is going, and I think it's important for us to be able to do that. If we just do it from the general fund and it's not designated for that use, it gets lost, and there's no transparency to that. So I like the idea of transferring it over and then transferring it back. Whether it's 108 or whether it's an exact amount, I don't care.
And this is just about the transferring it back part. We already
Yeah.
have the visibility of the transferring it over, correct?
Yeah, and it's not really technically a transfer over. It really is a service charge. So it would show up in the revenues of the PI fund, and it shows up as an expenditure in our parks fund for water use.
Which we had it for us to use however we wanted before we transferred it. Now it puts it back so we can use it.
we never, no, so we get this excess, the 108 is from people paying their PI bill, correct?
No, it's the city paying the PI fund
So we paid.
for
the-
our
we already-
usage.
Okay, I guess when.
Yes.
We paid.
Yeah, so the money goes in to the PI fund, and then
Now
it
it's
comes back
coming
out.
out.
So it's a
You
net
just not
zero.
do the transfer. Or you could do it, I guess, okay. But we did it already, or what you're saying is, as part of our transfers we did, we're just trying to get it back. Okay. The rest of the council, what's your feeling? You want to make a motion, we can see where it goes?
I'll make a motion. I move that the Highland City Council approve the resolution authorizing a transfer of $108,000 from the pressurized irrigation fund to the general fund.
I'll second.
Okay, motion by Scott, second by Kim. There's no further discussion, we'll go to vote. That passes 4-1. Okay, well, now on to item number 3E, which is a public hearing resolution for officer compensation.
Mayor, were you going to do this one, or is there any kind of an
no,
introduction you wanted me to do on it?
Let me just kind of go through. So as we're aware as we went through with the state legislators, that this is a new item that came out for the state legislation, is that all of our officers need to have a public hearing, and then we need to pass the wages and that. So if we kind of go back, I'm trying to look for that email that you sent earlier.
It's printed out on your desk too, Mayor.
Can I interrupt for just a second? Did we hold a public hearing for the PI transfer?
I thought we did.
Yes, we did.
Yes,
we did. Okay, we just wanted to make
And
sure.
there were several people that came up
I
and
was,
talked.
I was not paying attention to that, so, okay, good. It was
You
so
could be
fast.
forgiven for not noticing, since it was kind of two quick taps of a gavel.
And staff, you can help, try to fill this in. So as we're looking at on Exhibit A, the city administrator, the assistant city administrator, public works director, city engineer, city attorney / public planning administrator, financial director, library director, and assistant public works director. If we go in, what we agreed to do was that we were going to do a 4% market or inflationary adjustment plus a 1% merit. Now, as you look on this, that's showing on the sheet. The next item is the state. If you are a tier 1 employee, there were some changes in that contribution there, and the council, when this came up as a preliminary back in May, they agreed to go ahead and have that part of it. So as we look, we also had a study done to help us kind of come up. So part of our city administrator's agreement that was entered into when we hired our city administrator is they would be able to participate in any of the market adjustments that were done and the merits that were offered to the employees. Does that make sense? So we said, hey, no matter what, each year you will not fall below what we give to other employees as a merit or an increase. And so that's, now what you're also seeing is you might see some adjustments. Also, there's a wage study. Am I thinking this correct? That there was a wage study done, and the reason why you're seeing the market adjustment happening here is based off of that wage study. Our city administrator is not falling in that realm, and so there's an adjustment to the market for the city administrator. And so what it all comes down, your car allowance, and I'll just be transparent here, you've got 3 individuals that have a car allowance. As part of a negotiation for one individual to be hired to the city, they had a car allowance at a certain amount at their previous job, and to kind of hire them in, we offered that same car allowance.
And so that is not being increased?
That is
that particular one?
Not that one particular is not.
Okay.
But you're bringing up the city administrator and the city engineer to what we offered that car allowance, that new employee to come in. Does that make sense?
That's no. Sorry, I just want to be fair. The one individual who it's not budgeted to receive an increase to their car allowance. It's because that employee really doesn't use their car for city business, but we were matching what they were making at their previous place of employment. So the individuals who are looking to receive a car allowance do use their vehicle frequently for city business.
Okay. Is there questions about the compensation? I know there's been, because this is, so the percentages are based off of what our market study came in of what they're supposed to be adjusted to.
I have one question, particularly given that we have just approved a deputy city recorder. Is it still the case that the recorder's office is not a department?
I thought it was.
What context are you asking that for? So I'll be
Because
better.
executive municipal officers are department heads.
So the
among
way
other things.
The statute defines executive, that the officers that are listed here that have to have a specific approval and public hearing on any compensation increase, these are the ones specifically identified in the statute. So I will pull up the statute to make sure we're all on the same page here. So there's 2 parts of the statute. This is 10-3-818. And it defines, the first part is all officers, so you as elected officers and every statutory officer, that includes most of us here and the recorder and the treasurer, just have to have their compensation set by ordinance. We do that through the budget. The second part is the new code, which says executive municipal officers, every time they have a compensation increase, you have to have a separate public hearing and approval, and defines it as all of these things. Our recorder, this is, I guess, to your question, Doug, we don't have a recorder department. It's just part of our administration or executive team department.
Right. Yeah, my question was under 2A3D.
Right.
An individual who is head or chief of a city or town department or division. And that was why I was wondering if it's a department.
Correct. So we don't call our recorder's office a department. It just falls under our administration. She is her own thing.
I'm my own island.
Well, some of these, I think the reason they did that in the state statute is a lot of these usually have someone that reports to them. They usually have sometimes a staff or things of that nature.
Correct. If I were not the city attorney and if I were just the planner, I wouldn't be on this list. I would fall under the community development department, and Jay would be the one on there, not me. But because I have the attorney title, I'm on that list as well.
Now, and so the market would happen on July 1st, correct? But the merit happens on their anniversary of their employment anniversary. Any other questions? Scott? I wasn't sure if you had a question.
Yeah, I'm kind of struggling with this. I really appreciate the employees and different things. But I guess the question, we do these market studies and different things. Why even have a city council vote if we're going to adjust everything according to the market? I just get just a little, I want to be fair to the employees that, but we kind of decide for a 5% increase and maybe 1% merit, but some of these go well above that when they get the merit. But inflation, although it's gone up 19% since the last 3 years, the last year it hasn't gone up that much. So a lot of people in the private sector certainly aren't getting 5 to 6 to 9% increases. I'm just a little concerned as, I think we have to be careful because it's not just an increase, but there's benefits that go up every time. And our benefit package, I think, is fairly rich. And we want to be competitive with other cities. We like our employees. We want to be real fair. But I worry that employee costs, if we keep going up at these rates and do all these market things and stuff, are not going to eat us up. Because right now we're in the good years. We're in the bountiful years. What's going to happen in the years when we're not? And so I don't know. When I got this, I was a little concerned. It seems like we're kind of going up above where we need to.
So maybe similar question that Scott asked, maybe help us understand how we get to, with market, when we say market, when I'm talking to other cities, they're doing a 3 to 4% increase. When we're saying that they're at market, help us understand, maybe this is the question. I understand the city administrator, we go and say, okay, this is what the wages were, but are these others, you're saying that in order to be at market, we need to do a 4%, but what happened if someone was over market, are they still getting the 4% increase? Let's assume someone was making, we'll say 50, and the market is 46, but they still get the 4% increase. Is that the understanding?
So yes, when we looked at the pay plan, and we certainly don't want you to just accept this. These numbers are what's in the budget, and it's based on the market study where, so every single position was looked at in comparison with the about 20 other cities that we look at who are in our area, and we said, do what we pay this person to do this job, is it similar to what other cities are paying people who are doing a similar job? And if it was, if they were not being paid according to kind of what the market is dictating they should be, then they got an increase. And so while we talked about 5%, some of them, as David talked about earlier, ended up being more than 5%, and some of them ended up being less than 5%. We have not decreased anybody's wages, so either you got them, or at least what's in the budget right now that staff is proposing is you get the market adjustment to take you up to where you need to, or you get a 4% flat adjustment if you do not need a market adjustment. So you're right, Mayor, if somebody is being paid what they need to in comparison with the market. They're still getting a 4% adjustment to account for inflation, essentially, and account for that 3 to 4% that other cities are going to be adjusting. At least that's what's currently in the budget right now.
To me, that seems, okay, and I'm just being generous here, okay, if they're making 50, but the job is 46, but we're giving them a 4%, we're part of the problem that we moved everyone else's wages up when that job category didn't warrant. I'm just saying, if they're at 50 and your market, you're saying that, okay, they shouldn't be getting a raise because they're already above market, but what you're saying, anyone that's not, we're moving them up. And so it's, you know what I'm saying, we're giving the person, if they're below, to move up, but anyone that's above it, they also get to move up. We're not,
You're right.
We're not really doing a market adjustment because we're just saying you get a 4%, and if you're not there, we're going to bring you up.
You're right. This is a market or an inflationary adjustment, right? This first category. So it's a market if you're below. If you're at where you need to be, it's like an inflationary or cost of living adjustment. It's the fact that, okay, so when you look at inflation, it was around 4% last year. That's actually what URS went up as far as their retirement distributions go, and that's where we came up with the 4% number. And so we said, okay, you either get your market adjustment or you get this inflation adjustment that basically means that you get paid the same that you did last year, right? When you account for inflation because of the grocery bills and everything else that's going up for all of us.
We had initially, that the reason the 5% it was in there initially was because we were anticipating that the market adjustment, the market study would bring us in that ballpark.
Correct.
To 5%.
Correct.
And it turns out that the needs for market adjustment were significantly less than that in order for us to be using part of that for a 4% COLA.
Correct.
I think the idea of a market comparison is a policy decision that we as a council make in order to keep good staff. If you're not competitive in your wages, over time, we will not have the staff that the city currently has, which I think is a premier staff. We want to keep it that way. If we want to keep it that way, we've got to look at the market and we've got to look at the inflation. I think it's a balance of both. And I think what Aaron's done here and what the city's done in the budget makes a lot of sense to me in terms of adjusting for those situations where we could lose employees if we don't keep up on what other cities are paying those same employees. So it's a strategy and it's a policy decision, and I think that's one we made.
It was.
We said that we would agree to this.
We told them to go out and get a market.
Right.
I just want to also, though, touch a point that when it comes to employment, it's not all about salary and wages. We allow Friday closing, so 4 days, and part of it and good employment is salary and wages, but the other part is good management, good staff, and providing an environment is essentially extras and benefits as well. And then one other thing I do have to say is that bonuses and car allowance should be part of the salary as well.
I had a question about the car allowance going up because that was requested that be increased because of inflation, but then why is that not included in the overall inflation increase, cost of living increase?
So for the 2 employees that it's proposed to go up for, car allowances are paid separately. It's not part of their salary itself. It's a separate line item they get per se on their pay stub, if that makes sense. That's just how it's been structured and set up to be.
And is there a reason it's structured like that? I agree with Kim. It makes more sense to me to just see it as part of the overall. Is there a reason it's set up that way?
One significant benefit to us in structuring it that way is we don't pay benefits on it, I would assume.
We don't pay benefits. You probably don't pay FICA on it either.
Well, and
I guess we don't pay FICA.
This is the first time that if council chooses to allow it to go up, this is the first time it will have increased, and I think I wrote it in the email. I think it's over 10 years. So it's not one that goes up every year. It never has, to my knowledge.
So let me ask you, as we looked at the market analysis, did we also look at benefits? Because one thing, we are very rich in our health insurance. We are, as a city, that's one of the areas where it's a great benefit. And yet health insurance goes up, if it be between 8 and 10% each year. So that's also part of a wage increase. As they look at the market analysis, does it look at the benefits too? Does that kind of came in?
It does. If you remember, we did, per the request of the Lone Peak District Board, we looked at what are our benefits like in comparison with other cities. Sometimes we're more rich, or especially accounting for like 410s is absolutely an employee benefit. I totally agree with Councilmember Rodella. I do think there's other benefits to residents, but it really is an employee benefit. So we're better in some areas, for example, but like some cities still pay 100% of employee healthcare costs, employee premiums, where we pay 95%. And don't take that as me saying I'm ungrateful. But as we looked across the field, when you look at other cities, right, not looking at private sector, when you look at other cities, we are relatively the same. Sometimes we're better, sometimes we're worse in any particular benefit, but I wouldn't say that we're drastically different.
Hey, council, any other questions on this item?
So I want to make another comment. I don't want to be misunderstood that, I want to be fair to the employees and I don't appreciate their work, but, sometimes we're kind of comparing apples and oranges because our revenue streams are different than a lot of the other cities. We don't have as much commercial, for example. We haven't changed property tax for years, and I'm not advocating a property tax increase, but there has been discussion on the council. We don't index what we charge our citizens for inflation. And so, at some point, I think we're going to run into trouble if we're doing salaries and fees all based on COLAs and inflation and all that. And I understand the reasoning behind that, but we don't adjust our revenue sources. So right now, we've been rich with sales tax. We've been rich with growth. And at some point, that's going to end. And so what are we going to do? I mean, we haven't indexed our property tax. We haven't changed property tax rates for 15 years. And I'm not advocating that. But at the same time, sometimes I think we can't really compare ourselves to other cities. Lehigh's population's up to 92,000. Even though they have a lot of rich revenue sources and commercial and all that, they're raising their property tax again. And so I don't know. I just am a little worried that we have to be careful when we're basing all of our expenditures on other cities, but we don't base our revenue. Does that make sense to anybody? I don't know. Yeah.
Absolutely, and we try to take that into account. Like, I don't think that it makes sense for us to say to pay as much as Lehigh City for a lot of positions, right? Because there are differing duties based on the size of the city and things like that. But we need to stay competitive because as we see often, employees are willing to hop to different cities, and so. I agree. And it should not be Highlands Gold to be the top. It wouldn't be appropriate, given our city size and things of that nature. But I would advocate that we need to stay competitive to keep the good staff that we do have.
Just because the market analysis kind of came in a little late, are we trying to be at 50%? Are we trying to be at 40%? Are we trying to be at the top of the market? Where are these numbers coming from? Where we're saying, hey, we're doing a market adjustment. How is that?
It's average to where people are currently at. So we know that cities are going to move next fiscal year, but it's essentially average to where our neighboring cities are currently at. But you'll notice, I mean, for an example, but we also take into account their years of experience, right? So when we look at the pay plan itself, right, we're shooting for average. But then what an individual is making is based on how long they've been with the city and how many years of experience they have in other places too. So like, my position, I'm not saying you need to pay me middle of the pack of everybody else. That's not fair based on other factors in consideration.
But what you're saying is if you have a person that's there for 10 years, you're not looking to hire them as a person brand new. There's a point system that was given in the market analysis that said, hey, they should be at this point values. I think when we were talking through, it's a point value.
Because of their experience, yes. We want to reward longevity of our employees, certainly, or their outside years of experience, because that's valuable to us, too.
Here's a good, for instance. When we changed over our sprinkler repair guy, we've almost had to hire a 1.5 to replace him because of the experience and things. I'm just saying, experience helps you. Travel knowledge, where some of the especially in your public works, it probably comes in, and even your city staff. So,
one of the things that really kind of concerns me about this whole process, and I understand we need to have a public hearing, and I support that. We want a public hearing for this, but I would prefer that we cover all of this in a closed session without these employees present, and get to that, what we can defend as a council and what we believe is right for the city and that we can articulate that when asked questions about it, because to try to absorb all this now and to get the information when we got it and to make a decision tonight, I can do that, but I would prefer a closed session where we can be very forthright and where we really believe this should come out, and then we have a public hearing after we have a recommendation by the council.
Rob, help us with this. I know that this is one of the things I think when that was going through legislators that everyone was a little worried about, is how this would be coming about. But
maybe I'll just speak first as someone whose name is up on that list. We'd also appreciate if we didn't have to be here for the discussion. And then you felt more comfortable having a very frank and about the needs of the city. That is your role, to make these policy calls that are not easy, and we recognize that as staff. There is somewhat of a limitation, though. You can hold a closed session for the character, professional competence, or the health of an individual. Now, often you can tie compensation to competence, and we do that often with interviews. Candidate A has so many years of experience, this is their qualification, so we'll make them an offer at this rate. Candidate B has these, we'll do an offer at this rate. If it's a question of where in the market should we be at 25%, 10%? That's not really the competence of staff, that's a policy call, and that's one you really couldn't hold in closed session directly.
But we could have done it in a smaller groups as we're getting.
You can absolutely always do it in teams of 2 and a mayor.
And I think, unfortunately, and I know we were trying to get some things. I think this is where it came in late to the council, and I think
I would like to recommend we do that next year.
I absolutely agree with you, Councilmember Campbell and Mayor. I really wanted to give you guys this information a month ago, and we had a series of unexpected delays. And I'm sorry for all of us who are in a very uncomfortable situation in this moment.
My personal preference would be somewhat different than what we've discussed, which is that we have a robust discussion about this with regard to staff in general, and not be having so much this conversation when we're talking about executive municipal staff.
I'll personally,
and it's because the market survey was late coming in.
Well, some of them, I don't think we've been talking about specifics. I understand there may be about car allowances, but I don't think we've been asking about specific employees as much as the whole pay structure.
No, although their positions are up on the screen right there.
I guess my comments, and I took a lot of the councils, was generalization amongst the pay structure, not about, hey, this one specific employee. So hopefully...
And to Councilmember Courtney's point, this is the first item, because by the new state law, you have to adopt this before you can adopt the budget, and part of the budget is approving everyone else's wages. Yeah. So we get to be on the stand first, but it does involve, we have to decide, you have to decide, you want to do this, because this will also, I think, as I'm listening to you, guide what you'll do for the rest of staff as well. So it is a bit of a difficult thing.
If the council is having other questions, we need to have a public hearing. Okay. At this time, we open this compensation up for public hearing. Is there anyone like to come and address the council? Seeing none, we close the public hearing and bring it back.
You got to do it. So I can make another comment, just general comment. Yeah, and I think Ron really brought up the issue, because this is such an uncomfortable situation to be as a council, I think. But at the same time, we're accountable to the public. And it's hard in high inflationary times, when a lot of people are having trouble making ends meet, that we have to explain to people that we just gave our staff anywhere from a 6 to a 10% increase, essentially. And so I don't know. I think we need to get this market analysis ahead of time, and I appreciate Aaron's apology and different things, but I'm pretty uncomfortable all around with this just because of the state of the economy. So right now, we're in good times for the city, but a lot of private people are not. I mean, my son-in-law and daughter are working about 3 jobs, and I'm trying to supplement them to keep them afloat because of the high cost of everything. So, it's kind of it's a hard thing. And I would like, everybody would like to get a raise based on inflation every year. It'd be great. I'd like to. My salary hasn't gone up, for some time, and my taxes keep going up. But, it's just kind of, I don't know. I'm just kind of struggling with this a little bit. Not that I don't appreciate the staff.
I think one thing we have to be careful with is in today's environment, it appears if you'll quit a job, you could get you seem to sometimes get a better offer. And what we need to try to do is that retention. And I think that's what we're discussing. We're trying to retain or to say, hey, we want to stay competitive with employees. Because I do agree there's inflation, but I do think some other employers are raising wages. I don't think it's just that they're not. That's the concerns. And the problem is cities are. Public safety, we always will point to that as being a really competitive, but it's competitive. And there's some, I will tell you in your public works, it's competitive. And if we don't start compensating some city, the senior management, it's competitive. I mean, I've had some cities inquire about different employees, and I always will say, "Oh, they're doing a terrible job." And I look, and I says, "I don't want you to steal them." I mean, I look right at them and say, "I know what your question is." I says, "And they're doing a terrible job. I just want you to know." I said, "I want you to tell you, I think that the best employee you could find, but you're not going to take them."
Can I say one thing? So first off, I understand why we got this later. This school district thing took over everything, and I just think that we need to acknowledge that just took over.
Well, and to be honest, we've had some park situations, we've had some fence situations. We always do. We always have something, but
there's been a lot. So I appreciate all the work that staff has done. My hard thing I had with this is I made such a big deal when we were talking about public safety wage increases and saying that we need to be consistent between public safety and looking at the city at the same time. And I specifically talked about public works and how it's difficult to find those employees also. And so then I have a hard time when we didn't give public safety the raise that they were asking for, then coming here and giving a higher raise after, I guess, the conversation we had there. So it's hard for me to not have all of those conversations at the same time, because I feel like one decision affects the next.
This isn't as high as the public safety raise with 6%.
Yeah, I thought the public safety was 6.
It's 6. This is 5.7, 5.85, except for Aaron, which is more the market adjustment.
Yeah, but it was to me that was the conversation and kind of the direction that we were talking.
Yeah, I understand and appreciate that. I really do. But I support this as it is.
And actually, the public safety increase is a significant part of the reason why I wanted to do a 1% merit and why I support this level. Because I think that public safety salaries have been increasing substantially over the last few years. City staff salaries have not been increasing to nearly the same degree. And I believe that creates a morale problem within the city staff. We do have an opportunity this year to have the same increase across, and I think that's a significant morale issue. If we were talking about it outside of that, I might be pushing back against a 4% COLA. But that 6% this year is a really important issue to me.
And while some individuals will get more than 6%, when you look at the entire staff on average, it's actually less than a 6% increase, if that makes sense, of our total staff budget. Which is also true of like the fire department, for example. Some positions are less in line with the market, right? So they're getting a more focused effort than other positions. So it's following that same logic, but I agree it's hard to have those conversations separately. Chief Patton would be all for bumping his budget conversations back to the same date as ours. It just makes it hard to prep our budget, honestly.
But public safety literally was hampered by one particular city, not Highland, out of the 2 cities that we have. And Alpine got in the way of us giving what really was deserved. So that was a wrong, in my opinion. And I don't think we do another wrong simply because one wrong was already done. So I would like to have seen public safety get more, but we got some pushback from Alpine, and they got the 6%. I don't see this any more than 6%. In fact, I see it as less than 6%, 6% overall, like Aaron is talking about. So.
You know, and I know we brought public safety. I remember conversations prior going into public safety that we were looking at a 5%. You know, I mean, going into that meeting, it was 5%. And they came out of the meeting 6%. And so, I mean, I know we can talk all we want about that it was supposed to, they got it. But when I saw public safety was more than what I thought the board was really to kind of do. At least that's what my memory.
No, that was it. That's correct.
And I think some of this, you know, I'll be very, you know, some of the decision was made already before on some of this. This is where it's hard. We're talking about tonight, and I understand we're proving it, and we can make decisions tonight. But these numbers have been moving along the council for the last, you know, couple of months, and I understand some market adjustments are in here, but the 4 and 1% was already there. That's, you know, and I thought we even gave a 1% the last meeting. There was something up about another 1% that come and make a market adjustments. Am I thinking? I mean, am I thinking
merit.
that's
The 1% was merit, but
merit.
yes.
Mm-hmm.
That's why I'm saying this last council meeting, the council said let's add the 1% merit. I'm just saying I understand we're talking about tonight, but we've been talking about this. I know we have to pass this tonight. This is the night.
I mean, I hate council feeling backed into a corner. You can't give these employees who are listed up here an increase until this is passed, ultimately, based on the new state law. But these amounts are in the budget that is the next item for you on your agenda, which we do need to pass tonight.
I'd like to make a motion. I don't see the motion here.
Wait,
I
just have one more question, Aaron. Because I know I was reading like the bonuses and cars is that included in that salary adjustment for you and Andy and the finance director, David, or is that not included?
Is it included in our salaries or is it included in the
as
market?
part of your salary when you do that? Yeah.
Was it considered in the market? No, it was not. I will say it is standard for other cities to give those employees a car allowance.
I'm just saying, like when you do your market analysis,
Mm-hmm.
is that part of your salary when you're doing comparison versus other people's salaries?
No, and it's not in other city salaries either. So the numbers that we're looking at are just salary, not inclusive of the
bonuses and car allowance.
And no, that there's not. Well, I mean, I'm not sure if you're referring to the tier 1 bonus or any other bonuses we get. We get a minor Christmas bonus. That's the only other bonus that employees are eligible for.
I think I was just referring to the email that you did where it just said, let's see here. I don't know. In your email.
I think it was the tier 2.
I think it was
that you were referring to, but you just referred to it as bonus.
The tier 2. And that one, oh yes, I'm sorry. I was too short in that email. It's just, and that one's one time. So next year, unless council decides to continue that, that won't exist next year.
Okay.
So as we, you know, on the car, I think prior, this isn't just new for this city administrator or new for our public works. The car has been there, I think, the entire time I've been on the council or that. So this isn't a new item being added. It might be the increase is being added, but the car allowance has been in those 2 positions prior.
I looked back to, as far as our payroll records go, it was John Park that I could see was had it all through the.
I just wanted to make sure we're doing across the board analysis and including everything within that salary. So if we're looking at salary, but not including bonuses and car allowance in that salary, but others, city administrators who have their bonus and car allowance are in their salary, I just want to make it sure it's across the board so we're adjusting it appropriately.
What I think you're really asking for is comparing the full compensation package.
Yes.
Yeah.
Right. I think that's very valid.
So, council, if there's no further discussion, do we want to have a motion?
Where'd the motion go? I move that the city council adopt the ordinance enacting compensation increases for specific city officers for fiscal year 2024-2025.
Second.
Okay, I have a motion by Ron, second by Doug. Is there any further discussion needed on this item before vote? Hold it, you can't have that revealing.
So Brittany Bills is the one that voted?
It does not, there's only one vote. We need to vote.
I think we need a voice vote.
We need a voice vote because one's been revealed. So we'll start over here with Scott.
Thanks. Yes.
Doug.
Yes.
Kim.
Yes.
Ron.
Yes.
That passes 5-0. Okay. We'll now move on to item number F, which is a public hearing resolution adopting of the fiscal year 2024-2025 budget. And Dave, here we go back to you.
Thank you. Yeah, this is the big one. So I'm going to try and be somewhat brief. We've gone over the budget multiple times in multiple meetings. I'm just going to talk about some of the things that have changed. You've seen this chart before. This is our all fund summary that shows estimated beginning fund balances, total revenues that are in the budget, total expenditures in the budget, net revenue, and then our proposed use of fund balance in each of the funds, and then an estimated ending fund balance. No really big changes from the last time you saw this, just some small adjustments here and there. One to note is the general fund based on the earlier adjustments that we made to the FY24 budget. This reflects that for the fund balance. So here is the use of general fund balance, mostly the same as when we talked in our last work session, with the addition of more transfer from the general fund to the parks to the building capital improvement fund for the parks maintenance building. That's the $321,541. All of the other items shown up there were already previously in the budget. Estimated funding balance reserve. So this is when I mentioned that I would bring up the potential transfer to capital improvement funds to stay under the 35%. So with our surplus that we're projected to see in the general fund for fiscal year 24, we would estimate to end fiscal year 25 without any transfer at 38.2%. So there's likelihood that we're going to need to transfer about $410,000 if nothing changes from what we're showing now during the audit to stay underneath the 35%. So here's, you've seen some of these changes from the tentative version that was adopted in May. I also brought a hard copy handout of all of the specific changes for you. I didn't print out the entire budget in case there were any changes that you made tonight, but I will provide hard copy new printouts of the final budget once it's adopted. So things that have changed that are different that you haven't seen yet. Based on the certified property tax rate that was adopted earlier tonight, we have an increased general fund revenue of $65,557. As I mentioned already, the transfer for the parks building maintenance, $421,542. Garbage revenue, you've seen that number, the $50,000 based on the rate change of 35 cents, I believe, per can. The library property tax revenue, so we had projected or proposed a higher amount than what came as the certified revenue from the county. We did that in the tentative budget, being hopeful because there were some things we wanted to fund in the library fund as far as expenditures, but that came in $5,000 lower, so we had to make some adjustments to expenditures as well to balance that budget.
So the increased general fund property tax revenue is just from growth?
Yes, correct.
So I'm just a little confused. Why wouldn't that, you just projected more library fund revenue?
Yeah, in the general fund, we did not. We kept it flat.
Because that
but in the
same
library
growth
fund,
would pay for the library.
What was that?
I mean, the same growth would...
Oh, yes, yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, so the growth, if you look at the projected or the certified revenue from FY24 to 25 for the library, the growth is about 10,000. But just because of how we budgeted in the tentative budget, we estimated that growth,
15, 16.
but we estimated too high.
Okay.
Yeah. And then the wage benefit adjustments. So the discussion that was just had, this is for all employees citywide, comes to about $32,000. The general fund portion of that was about 50%. It's about $16,000 for the general fund. another 16,000 for the rest of the funds combined. Garbage hauling, we talked about that in the work session last time, as well as the Milrose Park improvements, and then the Parks Maintenance Building that was approved by the council last time. So this is a list of things that have been discussed in prior meetings, but were not included in the proposed final budget and will potentially be future budget amendments during fiscal year 25. Those include sewer rates with sewer revenue increase dependent on our rate study that, as we mentioned earlier, we hit a little bit of a snag just with looking at our expenditures and making sure that they're accurate. Alpine Highway fence, as the council continues to discuss that and comes to a final decision, then we will make an amendment for that. Additional amenities at Mountain Ridge Park, like the Ninja Course, the stage, I believe, some other items that have been discussed but have not been decided yet, were not included in the budget. And then one that was discussed a couple of times, the emergency manager position, is currently not included in the budget. With that, I'm happy to answer any questions that you all have.
I have a question for Donna. We budgeted in May, 15,000, you only got 10. Were you able to adapt? I'm putting my library board hat on right now and asking, did that create any problems for you?
Well, yes. I mean, in my budget, it's so small that $5,000 really makes a difference.
Yeah.
And there aren't very many parts of my budget that are flexible. And so that came out of our book budget and our program budget.
Yeah,
so we had to take them out of those two budgets because most of our other budgets are pretty fixed.
And back to David then, how did we make that mistake? How did we get 15,000?
That's a great question. I'll take that. That's my fault for, and that's one of the reasons in the past with the general fund why I've said I don't like to try and estimate the growth. Because sometimes you're wrong, and then you have to make these decisions where you have to figure out what to cut. So
wrong.
Yeah. So I think it was just being hopeful and optimistic based on the increase that we had seen from fiscal year 23 to 24, and hoping that we would see that again. But the increase we saw into fiscal year 25.
Well, honestly, it's quite surprising because since you've been here, it's always been you've been careful to be more conservative so that you don't overpromise and underdeliver. This was an overpromise,
this was one where I
underdeliver
wasn't,
in a big
and
way.
it came back to bite me.
50% is pretty significant. You know.
Now this
Didn't it also have to do with, David, we actually over budgeted this current year for this?
The certified revenue in 24 was 304,900 or something like that, but the budget was 310,000. So it was over budgeted compared to what the county said we should have budgeted.
We're all honestly trying to help the library budget where we can.
Yeah.
Finance director, city administrator, library director, and that's something I think we need to discuss in the future.
Well, just looking at that, Donna didn't even take her merit increase of 1%, right?
Right. We took that out as part of those adjustments.
Per Donna's request that I do not like.
Yeah, at my request, I had them eliminate.
I don't think an employee should be given that option sometimes. But.
So let me ask a question. So in front of us, we have the adopted budget for fiscal year 2024 in revenue. Yeah, we just adjusted that and added 671,000 more. So you add that, and there's not much difference about your proposed revenue for 2025 at 12,881 than what you actually got in 2024, and you're still gathering some revenue there. Why don't you assume the revenue will go up?
A lot of that is interest income. There's not a lot of confidence that interest rates will remain where they are right now. The Fed is expected to decrease rates at least a couple of times this year. And so,
are you sure about that? Because everything I'm reading saying is they're not going to do it.
Well, and even if they do, we're spending down some of those balances.
We are spending down some of that balance. That also decreases interest revenue. So just with those unknowns and wanting to be conservative as well, we didn't budget a higher revenue.
So, I mean, this is the end of my second term, and we've under budgeted sales tax every year. And yet we have phenomenal growth in the city. And I know that your property tax is going to be based on the homes and properties that were developed on January 1st of 2024. But it seems like we always, like this year, another 671,000, but we're just assuming that you're going to just go up 100,000 or something here. I just don't understand.
I think it's
that.
every finance director's fear that plays into that you don't want to be the one that budgets a higher sales tax revenue and then a recession hits or there's a down year or some type of a decrease, because then you're having to make even harder decisions of where do you cut things, how do you go to departments and ask them to cut their budgets that have been approved with that higher revenue. So it just is the nature of how I've learned to budget through my years in municipality service, of being conservative, knowing that you're going to be wrong. Almost 100% of the time you're going to be wrong, but you get as close as you feel safe. It's a lot of how much risk are you willing to take on with the projections that you're making.
But, with the growth in the city, and there's still areas that are going to be growing a lot because you've been doing a lot of not impact fees, but, building permits and different things, which I don't think is going to slow down, especially if they lower interest rates. Yeah, I just think sometimes we're a little too conservative on our revenues because
I hope that we bring in a lot more revenue than that. That would be more into our capital projects funds that could be used for projects throughout the city. I just don't want to be the one to say in a public meeting and on the document that we're going to.
So I'm trying to think. This last year, I think we did adjust. I think we went and said we were going to get like 4.1 or 4.2 in sales tax. It wasn't coming in as strong. The rest of the state actually adjusted down from what I thought. I mean, and so I thought we did adjust down a little bit because I thought we were budgeting a little higher. I think there has been times where we've tried to say, hey, what it is, and we had to adjust it down a little bit.
Yeah, and this year's been a little bit unpredictable from month to month. There's some months where we look at the data that's coming in and we think, oh, we need to decrease our projections, and then the next month will come in way higher than what we thought it was. And so we're like, okay, maybe we're okay.
Each city is actually experiencing. Some are saying they're not getting it, and I think Highland, we do a lot of online sales, and I'll be very open. This economy has struggled. Highland, probably the residents still kept spending, just what we're sensing.
So another question I have. So it sounds like the way it's budgeted, we're going to go well above the 35%. We do have some other things that we can budget, more amenities to the park. We talked about the fence. There's a lot of little things we've talked about. But it seems like there is some revenue that we've got to get down to 35 anyway. And you can certainly put it in other funds. Why couldn't we come up with $5,000 or $10,000 to give the library for their programs?
So let me just, as we go with that, I got some questions on the library.
Yeah.
In 2021, help me out here, David. They had the actual budget of $377,000, and now we're trying to show the budget of $447,000. So why can they not? Why are they out of bounds on their budget when they've had such a good increase? I mean, they've increased $18,000 this year. Have their expenses went up? I mean, I'm just saying, are they spending more? Is it because of software? I mean, we have to also look at their spending. I mean, because I'm just being very transparent that the library's had a pretty healthy increase. They've increased almost $70,000 in the last 4 years. So why are they not? And they're getting a 4% this year projection. Why are they? What's out of whack in the library? And I appreciate Donna being here.
Part of the increase that you're seeing is capital project. So the carpet replacement, the furniture replacement, one-time things that are part of that expense number that we're using fund balance to pay for.
Another increase in the expenses of the library has been bringing our staff up to a reasonable level.
Closer to market.
Beginning to get our staff up to a reasonable level.
Oh yeah, those are expenses, not revenues. Yeah, no.
But also, I'll just mention that you absolutely could subsidize from the general fund to help the library if you chose to do so. We haven't done that in the budget. We've been relying on library revenues to pay for library expenditures. But if you feel like there is enough surplus that you want to subsidize the library, that's within your power to do.
I am a very large supporter of the library. The deal we made when we did the dedicated tax was that that's what the library would have to live within. And I stood up and I said that I am perfectly okay with that. And when it comes time to increase that tax rate for the library, because that time will come, that I will actively work for that. I would love to have a larger program budget for the library. I think that because of the understandings and agreements that we made when we created that dedicated tax, that we should not be subsidizing the library out of the general fund.
Well, but the library at the same time doesn't get all of its revenue just from the dedicated tax. You do get it from some fees and things, correct?
Mm-hmm.
Yes, we get substantial, we get about 34,000 in non-resident fees and another 16,000 in overdue fines and book replacement fees.
Right. And some of the improvements you made in the infrastructure of the library was from donations, right?
Yes, we got a very generous donation to help us with some new shelving. And
So let me ask you, Donna, so
Yeah.
in 2023, we spent $23,000 on book materials. Last year, we spent 42, and we're saying we're going to 45. I mean, that's I mean, I understand the budget's out of whack, but is it because we're starting to spend so much on books and materials, or you know, our IT software is now 13,000, you know,
one of the reasons that the amount that we're spending on books has gone up so much is because of the use of ebooks. The ebooks are expensive. They cost between $50 and $100 per title, but our usage of ebooks has tripled in the time that I've worked here.
I really think being on the library board, I can say that you've got to look at what services the library is offering when you see that increase.
Well, okay, now I'll back off that on the opposite. I will tell you that, yes, the library, from when I came on the council now, is a totally different functioning
And that's got to
aspect.
factor in. It's going to be more costly when you are providing services like we're providing and tripling in some areas. That's got to be paid for, and it's a wonderful service. I've said this before, but I'll say it again. I came into this in October believing, if you would have asked me about the library, what's the future of libraries, I would have said they won't be around in 25 years. I can honestly say I now believe the library may be the only thing left in 25 years. I don't really mean that as strongly as I say it, but I do mean that it's shocking to me what the library is. The inroads that they make into this community is greater than any other organization in the community. Nobody does. The chamber doesn't do it. No one in this community does it the way the library does it, as far as bringing in a community involvement and a community service that is going to be around for the next 100 years. And I'm shocked to learn that, because I would have really told a different story about libraries. Books, they're all going to be on ebooks. Well, libraries dealt with that, and we now offer ebooks. So that is just a progressive increase in services and opportunities for our residents. That's a great service to our residents, and I couldn't support the library more than I do.
So I appreciate, this is not, and I think our library's doing phenomenal. So it's hard because we're going through a budget thing. This is not about, I think they're doing great. But my question, this year we laid out $35,000 in capital, and it's proposed that we're going to do 25,000 more. Is that what's knocking our budget out here? Because there's more capital improvements that are being proposed, where if you go look at the past 5 years, there's been no capital outlay.
What I've always dealt with in the private world when it comes to finances, you have capital budget and then you have your expenses and your regular budget. To me, why are we mixing capital with our everyday operational budgets?
Yeah, I mean, it's a separate line item, but we do have to show our overall budget for the library by state code.
I think if we take out the capital and look at it.
Yeah, but that's part of the budget they get of their money.
I know.
And in this instance, we're using built up accrued fund balance from prior years in order to pay for that capital, and we're showing that in the budget. We're not using ongoing revenues that are needed for operations in order to complete the capital.
Well, I just like seeing the operational expenses and revenues in one bucket and capital in a different bucket. The capital, if we were to add a big addition and we have $5 million, we're not going to say, well, we tripled the library budget because we did a capital expended project of adding an addition onto the library. That's where I believe keeping capital kind of separate. I just like to see it.
I'll mention that this type of capital project that shows within the library budget is a smaller capital. If there were like a new library building or anything like that, we would have that in a separate capital
So
improvement
you still
fund.
expense that out, and within 1 year, you don't say, oh, this is going to last 10 years, so we'll do.
No, it would be depreciated.
It is
anything that's
depreciated.
over $5,000 would
And see, that's the fact.
depreciated
That's
over
the part that's
a
not
period
part of
time.
this. We're only depreciating 10% of that. We have a depreciated value, and that's what balances the budget. So anyway, I like to see it separate. I don't like it combined.
So help me understand as we're looking at the library budget, is the 25,000 coming out of reserves or is it part of the budget that is on item number 22-4370 capital outlay? Is that coming out of budget or is that coming out of reserves?
It's coming out from prior year carryover. So we have almost $100,000 in prior year carryover. And so we're taking $25,000 of that to get new furniture.
So yeah, the revenue for that offsetting is prior year carryover budget, 2239.90 of that same $25,000. So one thing that the library struggles with is, to Councilmember Campbell's point, ongoing versus one-time expenditures. The library does have a fund balance, but you never want to use fund balance for ongoing expenditures and save the furniture this next year, right? The furniture expense. Everything else is ongoing in the library, and that's where they're struggling.
So one thing I have heard that I appreciate that we have a director that would like to do that to keep within budget. I don't think it's good policy to have an employee taking their wages to balance their budget.
Could not agree more, and I'm regretting the fact that I made that motion without an amendment that said that we give the 1% to the library director.
I think we ought to give her a car.
You get a car. Usually
do
a
I get a
car
car?
allowance is justified what they're doing.
Actually, that's another story. We need a car. The library needs a car. I mean, that's another story, and won't get into it now, but the library will need a car in the future.
Or some associated organization, at least.
Can I just take a brief detour, just a quick question since we're talking about the library? So Lehigh is going into a new administration building and there's a library in that. Is that correct?
What did you say?
Lehigh. So they're part of NuClick.
Yes.
And their new administrative building, isn't there?
Yes, they're getting a new building this year. Well, they're moving into a building, and they've been promised that they'll get their own building eventually, but they don't know when.
But
So they're leaving their old building because the city wanted to use that space for an administration building. And then they're moving into a different administration building that's smaller than the original building, with the promise eventually that they'll get a bigger library.
Oh, okay. Because they're part of NuClick, and so people can check books out of them too. Okay, very good. I just had that question.
So council, the question comes up, we have to have a public hearing. Is there still more questions on the budget?
Can I make one more comment? David, I appreciate the format of the way you presented the budget, because in years past, I'll be really honest, I had no clue unless I went back and did a lot of work myself how much money we had in the reserves in each fund. Yeah. This is clear, and I've added them up, especially 2 or 3 years ago when I was running for re-election. And I think we have a very definitive, clear understanding of the total expenses in the city in one spot. I mean, I don't know how many of us could have said before this year that we're going to spend $37 million this year in all the different funds, and that we've got $20 million total in reserve. How many knew that in years past? Did you know that, Kurt? Unless you figured it out yourself?
I knew about we had about 20 million amongst all the enterprises.
Yeah, I know. And I would hope you'd know as mayor. But I always had to kind of go back and kind of figure it all out, because I had to take some here and there and try to add it together. And so I really, really appreciate this. Is clear, definitive, and it couldn't be more transparent. And I really appreciate your work on this.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
And as you look at this, like as we're talking library fund, we would have had to be jumping around, here's your revenue, and then we would be jumping 200 pages later to try to find the expenditures. So, I mean, that's what we're really talking about, is we're going, the reason we can have the conversation, and these are all questions that kind of come up, is we can look at the fund and we can see the revenue, and we have the expenses right there. So
that's perfect.
Scott, that's what we'd be, I think, I don't know how many times, and I think, Kevin Brady, I don't know how long we kept on asking, can we just see what the revenue over the expenses really is, so we can see what we're doing? Because seriously, you'd be going, okay, here it is. What page is the next thing? And
yeah. Well, and I think Councilmember Smith, the reason that all fund summary is there is because of your request early on. So I appreciate you asking for that.
But it's excellent, and I so appreciate it. I really do.
And to piggyback on that, David, I know that privately I frequently ask about, okay, in 2024 we're having this much revenue. Are we really sure that we shouldn't be budgeting more?
Yeah.
In 2025, I very much appreciate the conservative approach.
Thank you.
And I do too.
I do too, because I was alive during what's called Black Thursday and Black Monday. And I mean, a recession literally happens overnight. You wake up the next morning and you have a crash.
Yeah.
And that could happen anytime.
And I got to tell you, last year our economy signaled when the banks collapsed. There was a couple of banks that collapsed like a year ago in March. And we did not know what was going on, and that's what we don't know. I mean, I do get nervous. We're heading in. We have some wars out there with Israel and what is going on over in the Ukraine. There's signals out there you don't know, and it makes people nervous on their spending. And I mean, I remember we were planning for a recession. Remember, Scott, we were here in a council thing, and we were so nervous we're heading into recession. I think in 2018.
We were so worried about COVID and everything, and then we made $500,000 more in sales tax. So I tend to be an optimist.
Well, no, and I'll tell you what I think is benefit. I didn't understand. Sometimes the surpluses helped us get snowplows or helped us get things, and it was at the time that you go, okay, you have these surplus. We've signaled that we might want to help with the fence. Now, I'm just going to say it's hard for I think the city staff to hear that we're willing to chuck $250,000. I understand it's a one-time cost for a fence, but to take $250,000 to go chuck at a fence. But we're arguing over their wages that are making sure everything. I think that's where it's hard to equate in some things. We have to be careful. So let's come back. We need to have a public hearing on this, on our budget, if there's no other questions before.
Would you like me to go down and be part of the public? So we had somebody here.
Yes, Scott.
Can we
go?
Can we invite Mr. Hart to come?
Well, I keep wondering if he's going to jump up. Okay, at this time, we're opening up for a public hearing of our resolution of adopting of the financial year 2024 budget.
Anyone?
Scott?
This is very typical of a public hearing for a budget.
We'll now close it and bring it back to council for a vote or further discussion.
If any of you are serious about any adjustments to library or salary, we need to do those before we do this. But we can do that at a different meeting in the future.
Would it be part of the motion?
We would have to revisit. No, we would have to revisit the former item.
Yeah.
Oh, that's right.
We could just do
The issue also is we would have to adjust some other budget line item to balance the library budget, or we would have to transfer from the general fund to supplement.
Yeah.
You have to.
We could do mid-year.
Yes, we can absolutely handle this at a mid-year.
We could do
well.
mid-year.
Okay, it's coming, Donna, and you don't have a choice. I move that the City Council approve the ordinance adopting the Highland City fiscal year 2024-25 budget.
I'll second it.
Okay, motion by Wrong, second by Scott. Let's go to vote. What's that?
Brittany's going to vote last this time. Actually, it was me.
Scott, I have to say you were joking when you said you could go down in the public and represent the public. I do believe of all the council members up here, you do represent the residents of Highland, probably
Well,
better than the
well,
rest.
thank you.
I really mean that.
I
I do
appreciate
not
that.
agree with you about 50% of the time.
So he doesn't agree with a lot of the public.
But I honestly, truly mean that. You said that in jest, and I'm thinking, but it's true. You do represent, as does the mayor very often, saying, hey, we've got to look at this is, you know, almost a sacred fund. Let's be careful how we're spending it.
One of the problems is a lot of times we don't have people here unless they're complaining about something, but they're watching online and they call me right after. So yeah, so I just want to be responsive.
Okay, so I showed that last motion passed 5-0.
That's correct.
Okay, we'll now go on to public hearing the ordinance. And this is our fence regulation. Fence and fences along the trail corridor, collector roads, and retaining walls. And this will be Rob Patterson.
Thank you, Mayor and Council. I also want to be respectful of the fact that it is 9:42 and we have been here since 5 o'clock in a meeting. This is not something that needs an immediate decision, and I also want to start with an apology. As when I open a code, I try to fix as many things as I can in it, but that does mean the code change becomes very long as we're trying to update many sections of our code. So as you saw in the packet and the report, I proposed many code changes, many of which we've talked about, many of which are cleanup things, but it does lead to a lot of discussion. So we have several topics we want to address. I understand that maybe we'll address some of them and maybe we'll need to have some further discussion. Again, this isn't something that needs to be decided tonight, but we have had planning commission discussion. The council has discussed this. I wanted to give a little bit of background on the history of trail fences. I was digging a little bit. In 2005 is when the council first required the kind of open style of fences along trails and basically limited it to 4 feet or 5 feet if it was open style. In 2010, that code was modified to allow privacy fences with the top 2 feet being open if trail corridors were over 40 feet. And actually, Councilmember Smith, I don't know if you recall this.
I do.
Staff had proposed a 50-foot trail corridor requirement, and Councilmember Smith pushed back and suggested it should be 40 instead. And then from there, 13 years later, this council reduced it from 40 feet to 30 feet. A year later, we like having fence discussions in May, apparently. We discussed more fence code changes. We've had a site tour that has led us to today. The Planning Commission had a public hearing on this in May. Actually, go to the next one. We had 3 residents, property owners present. They're not here tonight, but 2 of the property owners, they actually have been to the council before. They live on Canal Boulevard. They asked for the privacy fencing to be allowed to be on their property line because they live adjacent to Canal Boulevard, rather than having it be either set back 14 feet from curb or be open style fencing. The other property owner requested an 8-foot fence along their development. Patterson, it was Narwhal Homes of the Patterson group.
So how about the Mountain Ridge people? Don't they want 20-foot high fences?
They do, and I think we have a discussion about that from Councilmember Courtney. Later on, it's
okay.
in my 30-page slide deck.
Okay.
On the next slide.
Wait, can you go back just a second
Yes.
on that one? So they want privacy fencing on the actual property line along busy streets on Canal Boulevard. Correct. Instead of having that. What is the setback from the property line again?
It's 14 feet from curb. Usually ends up being about 5 feet-ish. So it's park strips 4 feet, 5 feet sidewalk, and then, so that's 9, so another 5 feet. So 5 feet off of sidewalk is the usual setback for privacy.
I just have to say I'm 100% against changing what we currently have. It's open. We put it along that, it's just going to close it off and make it a tunnel. I hate this. Whoever recommended that, I just do not support it. And I thought the Planning Commission, by the way, when they addressed this, handled it really well, although I didn't agree with some of the comments that were made. But they did have really good discussions in planning commissions about all of these things. Okay. But that one in particular, I think we've got to maintain that 14 feet.
We'll get more into that later. Councilmember Rodella was there. Okay. So that was the 2 property owners there. So the commission supported the kind of general proposals, the amendments I had proposed. And they made 3 additional recommendations to the council. One was removing vegetation from the definition of fences. So currently, a fence is defined as kind of anything that forms a screen or barrier, including vegetation, so hedges, trees, shrubs, any of that nature. And we have another discussion about definitions later. It's one of the topics. They did recommend to allow privacy fencing to be to shorten that setback. So it can be on property line along major collectors. And they recommend allowing privacy fencing along trails near public or property, the Freedom Elementary example. They did want to require school districts to maintain open fencing, but we can't regulate school fences. It was a 6-1 vote. The one dissenting commissioner, it was the privacy fencing setback that she disagreed with. She agreed with everything else, but she had concerns about allowing privacy fencing to be essentially on right the back of the sidewalk. So here's kind of the 6 categories of fencing topics we're going to talk about. I'm trying to break them down so we can discuss each one without trying to one bite of an elephant at a time, in effect. So the first one was general cleanup. This was, I just went through the code and tried to reorganize some things to make it a little bit easier for residents to follow, developers to follow, staff to follow. You can go on to the next one. I consolidated, updated definitions, and did a lot with retaining walls. One of the changes, and I actually put the wrong acronym in there, it's ICC now. They changed when a retaining wall requires a building permit, and so I was updating our code to reflect current construction code. You know what, that'd be great. Sorry, Brooklyn.
Are you sure it's ICC? ICC oversees it all, but they have an
It's the
IBC
ICC
and an IRC.
code. Maybe I did right.
I think it is the International Building Code where you're going to find this spec.
They're the ones who do the root beer, aren't they?
Yeah.
Yes,
we are. They taste good.
They said we've been in a meeting since 5. Then I clarified some of the definition of retaining walls to make sure it's clear. It actually has to be retaining something, not just a planter, not just look like a retaining wall. And that we clarified the height and how we measure retaining walls to retaining walls. And on the next page, here's just an overview of kind of how retaining walls currently work. So on the far left, you see when we talk about you can have an 8-foot fence, if you have a retaining wall, that is what that is. Bottom 2 feet of retaining wall, retaining 2 feet of ground. You can have a 6-foot fence on top of that.
But the retaining wall could be on the inside of an 8-foot fence in front of that retaining wall, which is what we have in that one location we visited.
Sorry, I don't think I followed.
On the left one here.
Yes.
That 8-foot could be, if you just move that over 10 inches and put that 8-foot all the way down to the grade, the fence could be 8 feet, but you have a 2-foot retaining wall on the inside of the fence.
Yes. So like that was the Spring Creek example.
That's
where I clarified the definition of retaining wall is as long as the system works per manufacturer specs, and in that case, they got me a letter from the manufacturer.
It operates as a retaining wall.
It has to operate as a retaining wall.
Exactly.
So that was the Spring Creek example.
Which I think is what I would prefer. I'd rather see an 8-foot fence than a 2-foot and then a fence on top of it. It's just a personal preference, but we need to give the homeowners that option, I believe.
Yes. I mean, when I look at fences, I don't care. If the bottom 2 feet works as a retaining wall, it's fine. As long as it's actually retaining something. It just has to be retaining something. The middle one is what happens when I was clarifying, even though it may look at it like a retaining wall on the bottom, where the grade is only 1.5 feet off, we start measuring the 6-foot fence from the from the higher property, but it includes what they might call a retaining wall. We've had that come up a couple of times. And the last one is also, if you have a planter box with my lovely little diagram there, we don't count that as being retained ground. So you're measuring it from the actual property grade. So that's just an overview of where we're at with retaining walls.
On that last diagram, the 8'6" fence is actually a not valid case. The 8'6" height on that rightmost.
So this one is fine. You have a overall 7-foot wall retaining. You have a 1-foot retaining wall and a 6-foot fence. Yeah, the 6 feet measures to the bottom of the planter box. I'm not sure if it's showing up.
Right, but from the other side, it's an 8'6" fence.
It'd be
No,
7-foot. A
it's
7-foot fence from the other side.
Because it's starting here and goes up 6.
But from the non-property owner's side,
It's a
It's
7.
an 8 foot 6 inch fence because it's 2 foot 6 inch.
No.
For the retaining wall.
But so there's 1 foot, then another.
Right, but the owner's property is on the right-hand side as we look at it, right?
Correct.
So from the non-owner's side, you have an 8 foot 6 inch fence.
No, because the 6 feet's right here.
But it's marked from the green up to the bottom of the retaining wall as 2 foot 6 inches.
Yeah, but you go from.
And then it's
this-
the 6. Okay, now I understand what you're saying. Gotcha. Okay.
I looked at it first. Huh? But yeah,
Okay.
it's that 1 foot.
These drawings are somewhat to scale. It shows the limits of my ability with Bluebeam.
So, don't we have a recent example of somebody that went through appeals and got an 8.5 foot high fence? Because they filled in dirt on the other side?
Yes. So what they had done when we first went through the code compliance process, they hadn't raised their grade. So they had an 8.5 foot tall fence. By the time they actually got the variance reviewed, they had regraded their property, and it was somewhat a little bit awkward because the appeal authority was looking at me as though, why are you enforcing this? And I said, okay, but it wasn't like this a year and a half ago when we started this process. By the time they actually got through there, they had regraded their property to be compliant. I did make them lower their fence, supposedly, to be 6 feet from the inside, as our code requires.
Okay, so council, here's the question on the fence. There's a lot of nuances with this. We're 10 minutes to 10. We've been here since 5. I think this comes back to where Rob was at. Would you like to discuss and go through the fence tonight? Or is this an item, or do you want to take certain areas of the fence code and discuss tonight and continue others? Or do you want to tackle all this at another time? What would you like to do?
With regard to the definition of offense, I would very much like to make that decision at a later date. I don't want to introduce, gee, I think we should consider all of these things and then vote on it the next day.
So I'll give my opinion. I really appreciate all the work you've done on this because it is a complex issue. I don't know how many times as I've been on the council over the years that we brought the fences back. I would like to maybe continue it for a little bit, and I'd like to study this more and ask some more questions. Because, you know, by looking at the budget, Alpine School District, all these other things, and the fee schedule, I got kind of overwhelmed. Yeah.
Fully understandable. This is a complex thing on top of many more complex things that had to get done today. This one doesn't have to be done today. If I could maybe ask, I'll just maybe walk through the rest of the general stuff. See if anyone has any concerns on that, and we can table the rest of it, which might require some more discussion and deliberation.
And in continuing it, I'd like to add that when we bring it back, when you bring it back to us, you bring it back to us in pieces. In other words, we have this issue, let's decide on that issue. And then we have another issue, let's decide on that issue. Because it is complex, and I think we're going to have split decisions on some of these issues that are being recommended, at least from the planning. I know I don't agree with some of the things the Planning Commission was proposing, and that 14-foot being one of them, and having the fence being on the property line. I don't like that. So I would like to recommend we look at it in pieces. I had a discussion with Brittany today, and it's just a really complex thing, and if we can break it down into manageable pieces, and that maybe 4 manageable pieces instead of all one presentation.
So let's just hold off, break it down, bring it back.
So is there a motion to continue? Now, because we have a public hearing, we can continue. We don't have to have the public hearing before continuing, correct? No.
Our code requires us to have a public hearing on this.
And you noticed it, didn't you?
We have noticed it for today.
Could we open it and continue it
We
so
could
we
open
don't
and
have to
continue it,
renotice
and we
it?
could, if someone wants to come about the fence later, you could still allow them to speak on any of these portions that we bring back.
It just means we don't have to renotice it, essentially, but it doesn't prohibit people from still commenting in the future.
So I would close so I'd open and close the public hearing?
Don't close it, and then you just continue it from the public hearing. Say, we'll continue this action in the public hearing, and you don't need to give a date.
Okay.
We'll bring it back when we can.
Rob, you can just have it open until some public shows up.
I just have a quick question on that. If we're going to be bringing this back in pieces.
At this time, we are open the public hearing for the fence regulations, trail corridor, and collector roads, and retaining walls. Is there anyone who'd like to come address the council? If not, is there a motion to continue it? Is that right? That keeps the public hearing open I guess you have to make the motion to continue the public hearing.
Public hearing and the item
Yeah.
together.
Is it okay though if we're making the motion to continue and we want it brought back in sections? Does that matter?
Yes, you can give direction, move to continue the item and the public hearing with direction to bring, these items back as pieces for consideration.
When you say pieces, do you mean you only want to talk about major roads in one meeting and short trail corridors in a different meeting, or
No.
you just want to be able to vote on them
We want,
individually?
we want to divide the question.
Okay. Correct.
Well, I think separate motions, so we can kind of
Okay.
discuss
Yeah,
each one.
sep-
use the drive-by system. So the purpose of this, the main purpose of this is just to get into the queue for Mountain Lands to place this order now. So hopefully in a year from now, we will have the product. Right now, the product's very slow and hard to get. So until we get our order placed in the queue and authorized by City Council to make this expenditure, we can't get placed in that queue with Mountain Lands. But it is a significant expenditure. It's $776,000 to switch to these M radios versus the R radios. And just to keep in mind, the R radios, when we installed those, that was back in 2007 to 2009, and they have a life expectancy of 20 years, the batteries on those. So we are getting close to the time that we'll have to start switching some of those out anyways. And in talking with Mountain Lands and Census, if we do switch them out now, they do prorate those radios and give you they hate the word credit, but they will give you a prorated discount on the new M radios for those radios that still have life left on them if you decide to make that decision. Any questions or comments on it?
What are the prospects on the grant funding?
We're still looking into those. It's a little difficult to replace. In talking with Andy, it's a little difficult to get grants to replace the existing infrastructure. We will continue to pursue any grant funding possibilities that we have, but right now it's looking like more than likely it will come from a rate increase for the culinary department. but we will continue to look through grant funding throughout this year. It's anticipated we wouldn't even receive these radios, the full allotment, until FY26.
So do we have the lobbyist working on this for grants?
I don't honestly have an answer for that. I don't know if Aaron does.
I've talked with Andy, and we think that's a good next project for him. So we're waiting to hear on one last water grant that he's been helping with us with now, and then the next attention would be Highland Boulevard and this, I would say. We are supposed to know in the next 5 days
On the
whether or
22nd,
not.
I think.
Mhm.
We're supposed to know on the ward of the 22nd.
Yeah, I've said it before, but I don't want Kim to be right. I just don't.
I agree.
So just to make sure I'm correctly understanding, Jeff, that what we're talking about here is accelerating the replacement of them by between 12 and 18 months from when we'd need to be.
Yeah.
Start replacing them in any case because they'd be hitting the end of their lifetime.
Correct. And that doesn't mean that at day 20 or year 20, they're just going to all
Right.
die. But they will start, they won't have any value after that, where they won't get any prorated. And we're trying to kind of capture the audience while they're available with this PI meter project. When they're logging in to look at their PI meters once they're installed, it would be nice for them to also pull up their culinary, and they'll be able to see their usage on both systems versus PI system. We can see it here, and then our culinary, we can only see it monthly through the billing, the monthly bill. So it's just, some of it's trying to capture the audience right now, but some of it's also to not let some of those batteries go out, and then we're having to purchase them anyways, and to get in the queue right now.
And we've got, it was like 35, there we go, it was 4,300 of them.
Yeah.
So the odds of some of them going out at the low end of their expected lifespan is reasonably high. I would
Right,
think.
there's a good chance. But I can't definitely say
sure.
that.
Yeah.
Any further questions on that?
Let's see if we can get the funding. Okay, got 8 more minutes.
Okay, is
Mayor.
there a motion?
I thought this,
Oh, it's just discussion,
Yeah.
I'm sorry.
No, this was an expedited
Oh, this
item.
was
No.
expedited.
Yeah.
So we do need a motion.
I move that the City Council approve the purchase of 4,300 MXUs for our culinary water meter reading system in the amount up to $776,000 and authorize the city administrator to sign the necessary purchase agreements.
Well, second.
Motion
okay,
by
now
the-
wait a minute. We just approved $1 million, or $750,000. Where is it coming from again? I thought we were discussing getting grants and things.
We will continue to pursue grants, but if
You
we
need the
are not
approval now.
successful in it, it will ultimately need to be from increased rates,
You'd have to increase the pressurizer, or the.
not
the-
culinary,
Culinary.
not
And when will
PI.
we have to make that decision?
So fiscal year 26 is when the bill will ultimately come due. Once we finish our sewer rate study, the next one we're having Fred shift to is culinary because we're concerned about the state of that fund long-term. We're not seeing the revenues that we were anticipating to
I
see.
think what Scott's
We are-
saying is we are almost kind of, we don't have a funding source here, so if you're voting on it, you're also voting at a future time, you're gonna have to.
Although
Unless we get a grant.
my guess is that if there is at least a year lead time, then should we, 6 months from now, decide not to do this, that we can pull that order. And they're not going to have a problem with that because they've got people in the queue already.
Sure, there's enough demand on these radios, especially with all these irrigation meter projects going on throughout just the state of Utah alone. There's a backlog of hundreds of thousands of these MXUs that are needed throughout the country.
Well, because these are all the same MXUs that everybody has to do for PI, right, in the next few years as well, every single city. So
If they're using the census.
that's a good point.
Census program.
Are these Chinese made? State overreach. Okay. Council, this is, at some time, we're gonna have to find a funding source. You don't have it with this motion.
We don't.
You probably know this one.
But we do know that increasing your fee will be one of the options we'll have.
But just beware.
Hopefully we can get a
I'm
grant.
voting yes, understanding that.
Okay, there's still one last person to vote unless someone feels like they need to change their vote.
Gotta hit submit.
5-0.
Okay, we do need to do 6A because that's holding up some planning commission items if we don't.
Okay, well now, are we okay not to do 5A, Ron?
I recommend we continue it. Let's go to 6A.
Okay, 6A, community development.
Just quick update on our planning commission next week. We have 2 items on our agenda. One is we're discussing conditional use permits, as we've talked about with the council, removing some of those accessory items from the conditional use process. The other item we're having is discussing what I hoped would be a minor amendment. We'll see if the council agrees with me and the commission. It's raising, I've had some questions about pool setbacks and pool gates. There's some requirements in code that we're a little bit more strict than we have to be according to building code. And essentially going to relax it to allow residents a little more flexibility in where they locate their pools and how they align gates and their fences for the pools. So that was going to come to the planning commission next week and then to the council afterward.
To clarify, though, that's to align us with the requirement in the international
Yes,
business.
we're mandating more barriers and kind of stricter requirements than we have to by building code.
Right, so we're aligning with the building code.
Correct.
Very good.
That's all the update I have.
Okay. With that, I think we'll take a motion. If there's nothing else, Aaron, do we need to go through calendar of coming up? I guess we have our first public hearing for Alpine School District the first week of July, which will be our next city council meeting, correct? And we are planning just to have that. It's not going to be a separate time. It'll be at 7 o'clock. We'll have just like we do with an agenda item, we'll have an agenda item that will have a public hearing on it, right?
Yes, sir.
Okay.
And on the public hearings, I would like to amend, have the mayor amend what he says as you open the public hearing, that if anybody said something that you agree with, go ahead and just state you agree with, and change that to if somebody said something that you agree with, there's no reason to say it again. If you have anything new, please bring it forward.
It's the public to kind of decide on if they feel like they need to come forward. It's hard when you're talking with the public.
I know, it is, but I've seen other councils do that. I've seen planning commissions do that on public hearings, where it's already been said, please don't say it again.
But they might want to make sure that their voice is heard to that motion.
I totally agree that it's up to whatever they're saying. However, the way that Audrey has phrased it at the planning commission meetings is if someone has already said a thing, then in order to make sure that you have time to make all of your points and that everybody else has time to make their points, please just say that you agree with them. Yeah. And that seems to be really effective.
Yeah.
Okay. Anything else? This your calendar up here. City Council July 2nd, July 10th, on Peak, 16th, another City Council, Planning Commission. And then we have the first week of August is our Highland Fling. So that is coming in, and we'll have events going on all that week. So.
And all the performances are planned and organized.
Okay. We need a motion to go to closed session.
I move
we go to closed session
for purposes of litigation.
Litigation discussion.
Second.
Reasonable litigation. Okay, motion by Ron, second by Doug. All in favor?
Aye.
We're now in closed session. Let's just get back there and we can get out.
I like the part where it says the regular city council meeting will adjourn immediately following the end of the closed session.
Let's get in that closed session.